Maria's not joining us. I'd like to call the Planning Commission of Wednesday, September 25th, 2019 to order. Can everyone silence their cell phones, please? Can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Donenfeld,
Present.
Commissioner Garner,
Present.
Commissioner Hirschbein,
Present.
Commissioner Song is excused, Vice Chair Maruzzi.
Here.
And Chair Woods.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, may we have a staff report on the posting of the agenda, please?
Mr. Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, September the 19th. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you. Are there any revisions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye. Okay. We move on to public comment. This is a time for the audience, and I think our planning director has a brief comment about public comment.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those who may have come to the meeting today to speak on items 2A and 2B, those hearings are continued until October the 10th. However, if you would like to speak on those items, you may do so under the public comment portion of the agenda. For those of you who are here on item 4A, which is the cannabis item, even though this is not a public hearing item, we will take comments from the public during the discussion of that item on the agenda. So I just wanted you to be aware you will have the opportunity to speak on that item. Mr. Chair, thank you.
You're welcome. This is a time that's been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on the consent calendar. You can also address us on public hearing items tonight and items of general interest within the subject matter of the jurisdiction of the Commission. If you wish to speak, you can come up to the mic and please state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're here again for cannabis, you can speak later in the agenda.
Maybe both.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. Hi, my name is Paula Auburn. I live at 1369 Campion Circle. I'm also co-chair of the Cannabis Work Group for 1PS, and Salim Alama, who's in the audience, is a co-chair with me, as well as some of the other members. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you for holding the September 11th study session. It was a great way to get voices heard in a more informal setting, and there were several of us there speaking about this issue, and I think we all felt heard. Second, kudos to Flynn Fagg and the staff for the staff report. It's 60 pages. And for those of us kind of on the outside over here, going through the labyrinth of codes is a very daunting task. We've held 2 additional meetings since the September 11th study session to review the staff report. Both of those occurred this last Monday. One was with the 1PS Cannabis Work Group to review as best we could the staff report. We concentrated on the first 6 pages. The second meeting immediately following that was a 1PS special meeting to talk about the cannabis issue in the staff report. There was no official action taken at that meeting. The staff report recommendations, we felt, fit nicely with what we've been talking about and asking for as residents to have some protection of neighborhoods, which is probably why I was giving kudos to Flynn Fagg, because we liked basically what he wrote. And based on some of the additional feedback that came out of the meetings on Monday, one, several people want a 1-mile distance from manufacturing and growing, and that's been our focus. We're not anti-cannabis, and we're not looking at lounges or distribution. We've only been looking at the manufacturing, which is an M6 or M7 zoning. But there was strong feeling that there should still be 1 mile between those facilities and residential neighborhoods, because we know from research that the odors can waft as far as 15 football fields. Everyone is, back up, I can't say everyone. The support for the I-10 green zones is overwhelming. That's a winner. I know there are infrastructure issues, but let's be realistic. That property out there is going to be developed, and the infrastructure is going to have to be run. at some point in time. Let's bite the bullet and do the infrastructures that are needed now. It will allow not only the cannabis development, business development out there, it will open up other kinds of development. While we have been focusing on M6 and M7, it came to our attention that the M1 zoning issue should be included and treated like an M6 and M7. And as I said in my earlier remarks, those of us that are not used to going through the zoning codes, and into that labyrinth, requirements were an additional 2 steps for notification. 1, when an application is filed, and 2, when it's going to come before the Planning Commission, that the neighborhood organizations and that those that are in the pipeline, all of the requirements that you're dealing with also apply to the pipeline.
Paula,
So-
can I have you wrap up? You've had
Yeah, I was
three-
going to say, was that what the bell was for?
That's what the bell was for.
Oh.
You can come back up during the actual item as well.
Okay, well, I was just ready to wrap up, so you know what our 3 goals were, because we've handed that all to you before. My testimony is in your staff report from the 11th, and I just want to say thank you so much for having the meetings and allowing us to have input. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience, particularly in items 2A or 2B, that want to speak? Can you move forward? Can you come to the mic and state your name for the record? And you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name's Rodney Garcia. I am an owner, resident, full-time resident of the Riviera Gardens, which is next door to Riviera Hotel. And I just wanted to go on record of saying I oppose the timeshare initiative, or whatever they want to do with the timeshare. Just don't agree with it. I don't want it. That's all I have to say. Thank you. I did.
Thank you. I believe that's going to be on the next agenda. Is that correct? It's going to be on the next agenda. You're more than welcome to come back, and I would highly encourage you to write a letter in ahead of time for us to review as part of the packet and make it part of the record. You're welcome. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak on items either 2A or 2B or of general interest to the commission? Hearing none. Oh, sorry.
I'm skimming through here, and I'm just want to be clear on the 2A and 2B, because I was trying to do this quick before you cut that off right there. I'm here to speak about cannabis. Is that
Cannabis will come up a little later in the agenda,
okay?
and you're
So
more than welcome to come
She
up.
was just addressing cannabis. I'm just a little confused on.
Yeah, she addressed it at the beginning. You can address it during public comments, or you can wait till we have the staff report and the discussion for a more robust discussion. It's up to you.
At the end? Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the confusion. Anybody else in the audience? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to the consent calendar, which there's none, and I'll move on to public hearings. And just a comment from our director.
Mr. Chair, on items 2A and 2B, what I'll ask you to do is to take action on those individually, to take a vote to continue them to a date certain of October the 10th.
Okay, is there a motion to do that?
Both items to October 10th continuance.
Okay. Second? Was it second? Please vote. Oops. Motion passes. Everything is moved at October 10th. We move on to unfinished business, where there's none, and we're going to move to new business. And this is item 3A. This is Far West Industry for the final development plan and a revised tentative track map to construct Elan, a residential project consisting of 56 single-family residences, 25 multifamily residential condominiums, and related on- and off-site improvements on 12.38 acres located at 777 South Palm Canyon Drive. Can we have a staff report, please?
Chair Woods and Planning Commissioners, this is the final development plan for the Elan project, previously called the Palm Canyon Project, located at 777 South Palm Canyon Drive. The project consists of 56 single-family detached residences and 25 attached condominiums, as you see here on the screen. The project was approved back in September of 2016 by the City Council, and the project included the Planned Development District, a major architectural application, and a tentative tract map. So the request before you now is to approve the final development plan for this project, as well as ratify the revision to the tentative track map that was required, or that was requested, that is being requested as a result of a settlement agreement for this project. So as a part of the final development plan review, staff is calling out a few things that have changed since the preliminary development plan. You see here on the screen, there's 2 areas that are circled where there were pedestrian paseos that traverse the site from east to west between the rear yards of the individual single-family homes. And so as a result of the settlement agreement, the applicant is requesting that these be eliminated because of a couple of reasons. First, this project was requested to be gated. The city council chose not to have this project gated, so entry and flow can occur into the site and through the site. So eliminating this would reduce the amount of areas that, potentially homeless areas that people may hang out in. So this is one of the items that was removed as per the applicant's request. So here is the revised final development plan. You can see those areas where the paseo has been removed. Another change that is being requested is before I go into that, so instead of having the pedestrian paseos at the rears of the property, circled here, they are proposing sidewalks on one side of the street throughout the site, as you see it delineated in the red lines. Another change that is being requested is to relocate one of the residences and the pool area from the preliminary development plan shown here to the area they're switching a lot for one of the common area lots. So you see those areas have changed. They have changed the pool area to where lot 15 was previously shown on the preliminary development plan. So this was the preliminary development plan here on the left, showing the pool area and an open space dog park area. And instead they're proposing the pool area where lot 15 was, and there is still the restroom and pool equipment building at the entrance. Project site has about 25 feet of landscape frontage along Palm Canyon Drive. So on the plan here, in the preliminary development plan, it was heavily landscaped, which is still going to be the case, but because the site has quite a bit of boulders, they do intend to utilize those boulders as a part of the landscape along the edges. So on the left side of the screen here, on the final development plan, you can see a number of those boulders are being scattered along the Palm Canyon frontage, as well as the landscape and trees that are being proposed. They are also proposing to landscape the Tahquitz Creek frontage, and you see here in the middle, this is the proposed plan with the tree and planting palette that would continue along the pathway that is located along the creek, the south side of the creek. They also propose to have some breeze block walls that would recur along the frontage of the project to break up some of the project's lineal frontage. And then on the right side of the screen, they have the Bellardo Road, typical for the landscaping. They do propose a landscape tree or trees and landscape within that planter area. In the multifamily architecture, that is, the preliminary development plan is what you see here on the screen. The buildings for the project are generally the same architectural style and design. So this is the preliminary development plan of the multifamily, the three types of units that front Palm Canyon. This would be the street elevation facing Palm Canyon. And the final development plan is shown here. Again, the architecture is generally the same with minimal changes. So going back between the preliminary development plan and the final development plan. On the left side of the screen is the preliminary development plan for the multifamily, for the side and rear elevations of the multifamily buildings. And on the right side of the screen is the final development plan showing basically very similar elevations as what was approved by council. There are 3 floor plans with 2 variations within each, so floor plan 1, 2, and 3, and there's an elevation A and B for each of those floor plans. What you see here on the screen is the elevation of from the preliminary development plans for the street facades of those buildings. And the final development plan is shown here. Again, pretty much the same elevation that you saw for the preliminary development plan for each floor plan, preliminary development plan, and the final development plan. So there really hasn't been any change, any significant changes to the elevations. And this shows the side and rear elevations of those single-family homes for the Plan 1A, the preliminary development plan that was approved, and the final development plan on the right. Plan 2A, this is the preliminary development plan on the left and the final development plan on the right. Again, pretty much the same elevations. And Plan 3A, side and rear elevations, preliminary development plan on the left here on the screen, and the final development plan on the right. So this plan here shows the final development plan, the mix of the proposed single-family units. So Plan 1 is the lighter shaded tan, Plan 2 is kind of the medium shade tan, and Plan 3 is the darker shade tan. The applicant has submitted a plan for your consideration today that's different from what you had in your package and shown here on the screen. So they are seeking to incorporate a Plan 3 along the north side of the project. And so I have a copy of that to hand out once I'm finished here with my presentation. Before I move on to the tentative map, I also just wanted to indicate that they have, as we previously discussed a year ago when they submitted their time extension, requested to elevate some of the grades for the project. So there is more of a subtle grade change as opposed to what was initially anticipated for the project, with a lower grade adjacent to Bellardo. And that would result in some pretty significant retaining walls along the westerly edge of the project site, in the range of seven feet or so. And then if they had the perimeter wall along that site, it would be basically a 12-foot wall that would back up to some of the homes at the westerly edge of the site. So instead of doing that, they are proposing to elevate the grades to be more closely aligned to the sidewalk and street grade along Bellardo, and step the property down towards Palm Canyon. So that is a change that is also proposed as a part of the project. And so you have the preliminary and the final grading plans as a part of your packet too. And then lastly, I'll just touch on the proposed changes to the tentative map. The tentative map that was originally approved for the project is shown here on the screen, and you can see that it did have the rear Paseo, the Paseo lots in the center of the project. And so with the change to to eliminate those Paseos, the tentative map had to be revised, and and also with the change in the location of the community pool lot, with the relocating it where the single-family home lot was, they had to revise the map to accommodate those revisions. So you see here on the screen, I kind of drew in some areas that were highlighting those changes. And then, so this is the final map that is being proposed. The changes in terms of the density there are no changes in terms of density. The street grid, it's all the same. 56 single-family lots and a one-lot subdivision or one-lot condominium map for the 25 residential units. So that concludes my presentation on the project changes. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. The applicant is also here. And as I said, they do have a new exhibit for you to take a look at regarding the unit mix for the project. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have a handout you were going to pass around about a third? While you do that, I just want to confirm, this has gone through AAC, this has gone through Planning Commission, and it's gone through City Council, and it's just coming back to us for final compliance.
Well, that's not exactly true because they've made several changes to what was approved. So the way I see it is they're coming back to us for approval of those changes.
Okay, just let me, they are coming back to us for final compliance that has some changes from what was originally approved. But this would be, if we approve those changes, this is what they would go forward with. If we don't approve those changes, we would redirect them to do something else.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, are there any questions of staff at this point? Commissioner Donenfeld.
First of all, I want to compliment Mr. Newell on the visual presentation, particularly when you're dealing with a track map change. It gets a little bit confusing for us, but this is very understandable. My preliminary question is this. With respect to deviations between the preliminary and final plan development, what is our level of discretion with respect to approving the changes? Is there a threshold? Is it substantial, insubstantial? What are we to be guided by in terms of determining whether the changes being proposed today are within the purview of approving a final map as opposed to the preliminary map?
So I have indicated on within the staff report some of the changes that have occurred. And with the new adoption of the Plan Development District Ordinance, there is specific authority granted to the Planning Commission to approve minor changes. And those do include minor changes to setbacks, as well as I think they're proposing the change to the distance between buildings. So there is some authority within the new adopted Plan Development District Ordinance that does allow the Planning Commission to grant minor deviations.
I'm sorry if I can just jump in just one moment, Commissioner Donenfeld. But there were also some changes that came out of a settlement agreement that we're looking at that weren't part of the original as well.
That's correct.
And give me your opinion, maybe the planning director or our attorney or David, the removal of the paseos and the lowering of the elevation at the rear of the site. Raising, I mean. Do you feel those are sufficiently minor to permit the approval of the final plan?
Yes, we do. We feel that those are minor changes. With the removal of the paseos, what they are doing is adding that area back into the sidewalks that will be added to the street. So it's basically change one from the other. We find those to be equivalent. In terms of the grading of the site, what it does, we think aesthetically, is makes it more compatible with what you will see across the street with the residential development there, that you don't have such an extreme difference in the grade as you're going from Bellardo down to Palm Canyon. The number of units hasn't changed. The architectural style is the same. The amount of open space is the same. And so for those reasons, we find it to be in substantial compliance with the preliminary approval.
I'll reserve my opinions until later. These are just questions, right? One more question with respect to the Tockwitz River Walk, the Creek Trail. The homes that are backed up to that, what is the nature of the wall? Are there access opportunities from those various lots, like a door or something? I didn't. The way you described the fence, it looks like the fences are not aligned together. They're sort of like staggered, and it looks like there's space among the various fencings to go into the properties. Is that correct? I recall us approving gates or something to get out to the river trail.
Yeah, correct. So there was actually more of a courtyard style rear yard that would abut the creek there. So instead, they are proposing to install a wall along the rear of the project, or along the creek of the project, and also propose a breeze block wall feature that would recur along the edge of the property.
So the breeze block would be in front of the continuous wall?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the report. I do have some questions. Could you talk about this? I wasn't aware of a settlement agreement. Who was that between?
There was a private group of citizens who sued the city and the applicant over the approval of this project. As part of the settlement agreement, the city had to agree to changes to the project, as did the applicant. That was approximately 90 days in the process, which added on to the time of the extension.
And what were those changes from the settlement agreement?
What you see is that the paseos have been eliminated in place of public sidewalks on the streets. That was the key change to the property.
Okay. Is that the key settlement agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And this was approved by City Council in 2016, correct?
Yes.
And in terms of entitlement timing, that clock ticking thing, is this within the statutory time that this is still vested?
Yeah, so this project was approved in September of 2016. With the lawsuit and settlement agreement tolling that occurred, it pushed it to January of 2017. The applicant got a one-year extension, as you may recall, about a year ago.
Oh, we
Actually,
gave that an extension?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so extension was granted, so they had 3 years to exercise the entitlement by getting the final development plan approved.
Okay, I just have a couple more questions. I believe there was part of the original agreement or conditions or the submittal, not original submittal, but a later submittal, because there's been probably a half a dozen already. There was a prohibition against a second floor up against the Tockwitz Creek side of the project, and if there was a second floor along those houses, it was to be at the front of those houses. Is that in compliance? Is this submittal in compliance with that?
So so you'll see there's a condition that the Planning Commission imposed back in 2016 that the edge of the project on the north side, Tockwitz Creek and Bellardo Road side, have to be a mix of 50/50 one and two-story units. The plan that's proposed is consistent with that in terms of they do have roughly half of the units along both project sites, or along both edges of the project as being 1 and 2 story. Where the 2-story is proposed, it is Plan 2, and the Plan 2 has the second floor closer towards the interior of the project.
Towards the street, towards the street that the house faces?
Yes.
Okay.
But as I said, the applicant has submitted a revised unit mix for you to consider today, and I'm sure he'll elaborate.
Does it change what you just said?
It would.
To-
Because Plan 3 has the bulk of the second story at the rear.
Okay, so that's a significant change then if the City Council and Planning Commission specifically asked them to site the bulk of the second story of these houses away from the creek trail, and now it's towards the creek trail. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the condition was that, I can pull it up here. Condition was written, and it said, unless approved otherwise by the Planning Commission, a 50/50 mix of 1 and 2-story homes shall be provided on northerly and westerly edges of the site. Where 2-story homes are constructed in these locations, they shall be limited to the product type that has the second story near the internal streets. So it would be contrary to that condition.
Okay, so the submittal they're giving us today is contrary to a specific requirement that we imposed on the submittal previous to this?
Correct, unless the
Okay.
Planning Commission finds that.
No, but I mean, that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I had was, I have two more, I'm sorry. And this is something I've asked every time this project has come before us, and you guys that are new here, we've seen this probably 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 times. We've seen it a lot. I've always asked, what's the minimum dimension between the perimeter wall of the project on the north side and the property line. In other words, how much of that landscape buffer is within the property of this ownership?
I think the easiest thing to look at is probably the tentative map that shows the lots.
You want to bring that up for us?
Yeah. And it looks like it's about 4 feet from the, 4 feet of common area, a depth of the common area lot. So in addition to that, so that would be where the perimeter wall is. And then they would have another setback to the rear of the house.
No, but I'm talking about from the wall, because we're talking about trying to like naturalize that trail and between the wall and the property line. And is that 4 feet the minimum, or is it sort of the median or the most?
It's probably the average.
The average, okay.
Yeah,
And has
they-
that changed? Because I thought it was 10 feet was the minimum.
So that would probably, yes, that would be a change.
So in other words, the landscape buffer that the developer is offering us has shrunk by 6 feet as an average?
And I probably would want them to explain the reasoning behind that.
But is that, I just want to understand if that's the case.
It's less than it was previously, yeah. But they've
By an
provided-
average of 6 feet?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
But they've provided additional buffer on the south side. And I think it was because the grades had changed.
Well, I'm just trying to understand what the differences are between this submittal and the ones that were approved by Planning Commission and City Council. And it sounds like there's a couple more than were in the staff report. So my final question is, focusing on the need or the desire to raise the pad on the west side of the project, have they done any site sections through there? I didn't notice any, but were any submitted?
They have on their, they don't have any that extend across the entire site.
No, I'm not interested in the entire site. I'm interested in the relationship of the pad and the subsequent dwelling that's to be constructed on the pad and Belardo.
Yes, they have a
That's
site
something-
section.
Did I miss that?
In your preliminary grading exhibit.
Is that in this package, David?
Yeah, it was it was the attachments. Well, I can tell, it's just behind it's behind this page, which is your unit mix.
Oh, it's in this package then.
Yeah. So you have your landscape plans in the front of those larger 11 by 17s. Behind the landscape plans is the revised tentative map, the unit mix, the preliminary plot plan, and then the preliminary grading plan after that. And within that exhibit, they have site sections showing what the westerly edge would be with the new grades.
Can you point to that? Because it looks like the section is only through the internal street. It doesn't show Belardo.
Section, it's section B, BB, which is the bottom right of the page. I don't have it on, I don't have it as an exhibit.
But BB doesn't show what I'm asking. BB shows the street behind the condo buildings. But that's over here.
Belardo Road.
And look,
Yeah, no,
BB,
I'm using the label South Belardo Road.
where's that on the sheet though?
It's supposed to be up here.
No, but where is it on my sheet?
Okay, actually, there's probably a better exhibit to look at, which is the conceptual site plan and site sections. Conceptual
sorry.
site plan and site sections has
Okay, got it.
a section through
Okay,
lot
pointing in a
48.
different direction.
And the applicant has just handed me another exhibit that shows what the section would be as approved by the council and then as proposed with the new grades. So I'll hand that to the planning commission to take a look at.
Commissioner Hirschbein, did you have any more questions?
No, I was just trying to understand this section. It's really
I have a question of
difficult.
engineering staff, if I could. As I understood it, the site had a lot of challenges as far as the engineering work that needed to be done. And part of it was the grade between Bellardo and the site itself. Were they able to work with engineering and overcome those obstacles?
Yes, we've had a few conversations with the applicant, and they are currently trying to secure dirt, soil, so have it, to bring that site up. And we talked with the city engineer about this, and we don't have a problem with it. They do have a few items that they need to clear up before that can happen. They need to make sure that the tribe is okay with, tribal monitoring and that sort of thing on the site, but yeah, we feel that it's not an issue.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Maruzzi, Vice Chair Maruzzi.
David, I'm just curious, you gave us this resolution.
That was not provided in the packet. So that is, if the commission chooses to approve the final development plans today, that's basically the resolution to do so.
Okay, this is, oh, sorry.
More than one, sorry, you said more than one. On page 5.
Property line.
Property line?
Yep.
And then in final development plan, it says 24 feet required due to height, proposed 25 feet from north property line. I don't understand what the differences are.
So they initially had a 12-foot setback, and then as the project evolved, the buildings started to get further away, and there was kind of more of a common space between the north property line and the multifamily units. So they are proposing, it's about 25 foot from the north property line, and so it would comply with the plan development requirements.
Can you show us that?
Typically, when you have in our multifamily zones a building that exceeds 1 story, your setback is equal to the height of the building.
Can you show us that on the plan?
Okay. So that's the area.
So does everyone else understand that? Okay, well, we'll see. And then on the next page, on page 6, I want some more clarification on this issue of the stepped pad design. And the reason I'm asking is because, as you know, the pads that are in the project that is northwest of this, Ahad and Ramon, forget the name of that project, the pads are very, very high. And I recall some of the commissioners mentioning after the fact that they were not aware, or it wasn't clear to them, that those pads would be so high before the houses were constructed on top of them. So in this case, you're talking about raising the height of the pad on the west side along Bellardo, and apparently it used to be 5 to 6 feet below the road or the sidewalk, and now it's 1 to 2 feet from, that's correct?
Correct.
So the buildings will go up at least 4 feet higher than they were before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so instead of having a building that's lower than Bellardo, it's going to be closer to the sidewalk height on Bellardo.
And the reason for that is because they didn't want to put up a retaining wall.
It's correct. It's to minimize the retaining wall along the westerly edge.
The rest of the pads are the same as they were originally proposed?
No. So because of those increases along the westerly edge and some of the drainage issues that this project has run into really since the start of how this site would be developed, it does involve slight increases to the single-family pads from Bellardo.
All the way to
All the way
Palm Canyon.
towards multifamily, yeah.
So when you say slight, what does that mean exactly?
So, the range is probably 2 to 4 feet in difference. But again, the goal is to step it so that as it gets closer towards Palm Canyon, it's closer to the street heights.
When you look at the project from Palm Canyon, you'll primarily see the multifamily dwellings, correct?
Yes.
Will you see the residences west of that, behind it?
You probably would as you traverse South Palm Canyon over the creek, yes.
And if you were on Mesquite looking at it diagonally, I guess you would see them. So the houses are higher than they were because of the pads. And so we have to decide whether or not we think that's appropriate.
Correct. The houses are higher because of a couple of reasons. Drainage, the site has some drainage issues, and the second is to minimize the retaining wall for the homes along Bilardo.
Right, so this is considered minor as relates to this discussion.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner?
Can you talk more about the drainage issues?
So the site, what is happening around the property is to the west of the property on west of Bilardo, there's two large culverts that are capturing water as it comes down the hill and would funnel onto the site, which if you've been out there, there's quite a significant drop from Bilardo, the edge of Bilardo into the property. So those culverts collect and convey water through the site, and our engineering folks can probably explain it better than I can, but they have to collect and convey that through the site per the previous conditions. So in order to do that, there has been a couple of different iterations on how that might occur. One is that they catch it and they extend a drainage line down Bilardo to Mesquite to the south, and then continue that down Mesquite all the way to Random Road across Palm Canyon, and then that drops back into Tahquitz Creek. That's been one option that they've considered. Another option is to catch the drainage through the site and take it to the creek at the northeast corner. There's been some questions about whether or not that's possible. So that's kind of also part of the reason I think that they're trying to increase the pads here to allow those drainage facilities to go through the site. And I don't know if our engineering office has any more comments or the applicant wants to explain some of the reasoning further, but that's my understanding of how it's worked.
I'm just interested in whether or not it's necessary for it to be higher in order to solve the drainage issue, or if there's other ways to do that.
The solving their drainage issues would be solved either way. Raising these pads and collecting the water or intercepting the water in Bilardo Road and bringing it, can I use your pointer there?
Top button.
Top one. So there's a culvert that comes across Bilardo here, and there's another one that comes across Bilardo here. And by raising the pads, what they're planning on doing is capturing that pipe in the street, bringing it down Bilardo, and then it's going to come into the tract, come around this way, and then it's actually going to dump into the wash rather than going all the way down to Mesquite, across Palm Canyon, connecting to the Cameron project, and then entering the wash that way. By raising these pads and collecting this here, it's a much better way of conveying that water. We don't have as many underground facilities that have to be maintained. There's less impact to the surrounding streets. They will not need to basically destroy the intersection of Mesquite and South Palm Canyon. There is a lot of issues with the drainage here, and then this is by far the best solution that's come up with so far.
Thank you.
No, hold on. Follow-up question? Okay.
So, but what you're saying is that solution you just outlined as being a superior solution, is that contingent on raising the pads on the west side of the project?
Yeah, it would be, because they have a couple items. So when you're dealing with drainage on a lot, you have two elements that you have to contend with. One is you have to accept and convey all off-site water that historically ran through your site, and then you have to deal with the water that you're generating on site. And you typically are not allowed to commingle those two waters, so you have to try to separate them. By raising these pads, it gives them a little bit better management of that water. They're able to conduct and convey the water that they're actually generating on site, take it to some underground facilities there, scrub it, clean it, do what is required of a water quality management plan, and then those two waters can converge and go into the creek. By raising these pads, and most of the raising of the pads is at Bellardo, and it eventually steps down to almost the natural grade or a little bit lower. From what I've seen at South Palm Canyon, it actually allows them to convey that better.
So I'm specifically interested in the pads that are backing up to Bellardo. If those were at the original height that was that's been approved, you outlined a drainage plan that goes south on Bellardo, enters the site at the southwest corner, and then goes east along that kind of edge of the property, and then goes back north towards the creek. And this is all underground.
That's all underground.
How would I don't understand, none of that seems to me to be affected by the height specifically of those pads facing Bellardo.
So if the pads were left the way that they were originally approved, excuse me, you'd end up, with these really large retaining walls from the back side of the properties. They would have I don't want to say a really difficult time. It would be difficult to get that water out of those backyards.
So you're talking about drainage on the property,
On-site
not the off-site drainage?
Correct. You would have a hard time conveying that water to the interior streets just so that it could be conveyed properly. You would end up with a tremendous amount of drain pipes. In some cases, you may end up with a couple of sump pumps in there just to get some of the water out. So this is a much better
So you
solution.
couldn't slope the lots back to front down?
You could, but you're creating this corridor between the rear of the house and this large retaining wall, and it just makes it more difficult to do that. You end up,
But they're still proposing a retaining wall, even though they elevated the pads.
yeah, but that area is not nearly what it was before, and it gives them more area to hike up the pad so they can drain the water out properly.
I just want to, Commissioner Maruzzi?
Yeah, just, excuse me, picking up on that. So the plan that was approved, which had a retaining wall, how high was the retaining wall?
Was it?
And why was that such a bad idea? Because the wall was too high, too tall?
Well, I think in terms of the design of the project, what it would happen is in some cases you'd have the roofs of houses at the level of Bellardo Road.
Why is that a problem?
It's not really functional for someone who owns a home and looks out back to a 12-foot high wall.
Why was it approved that way?
There was some discussion at the city council meeting when this project was originally approved back in 2016, dissatisfaction on the part of council members with having the homes essentially buried next to Bellardo. And one of the things they had asked for is that when it came through the final PDD process to look at some ways to alleviate that condition.
So they wanted them raised?
They wanted something modified there at the property so the houses weren't sunk so far below the street.
Because of visibility from the west side of these houses?
Not necessarily, but looking at the conditions of the subdivision itself, that you weren't creating a desirable environment by having houses well below the street with a large retaining wall.
And yet they approved it the way it was?
And yet they approved it, yes.
Okay, the last question I have is, if you're driving on Bellardo and you're looking east, will you be able to see the valley with the current proposed height?
Well, what you would see would be probably the perimeter wall, which is 6 feet in height, and that's around from the height of the sidewalk.
You
along
wouldn't have
Bellardo.
seen it regardless of whether that taller retaining wall was there and the houses were sunken. versus now, where they're raised, and
Yeah,
you'd have the same view essentially?
I mean, I think what you would have seen before was just the 6-foot-high wall, and now with this, you'd see the
Some roofs.
tops of houses, yeah, as well as a 6-foot-high wall.
So before we move on, we have a lot of people in the audience that are here to speak on an item that's later on, not to cut this one short. We're getting into some engineering details about the thing, but what I'd like to know is, it's not a public hearing. Do people want to hear from the applicant?
Well, I'd just like to say one thing. I believe originally it was proposed to be a picket fence at Bellardo and not a solid wall, and that was in order to retain that view corridor you're referencing.
Yeah, because if we make decisions here, and then afterwards we say, gosh darn it, I didn't know that was going to be so tall, and you can't see the valley anymore. Then we feel like idiots because we didn't actually ask the right questions at the time. So that's why I'm just trying to figure this out. Because I drive in Bellardo all the time, and I like looking out and seeing the valley. Now, it sounds like we won't see it, but we wouldn't have seen it anyway, so therefore it's kind of a wash. That's what I'm sort of getting from what everyone's saying, right? You weren't going to be able to see the valley regardless.
Originally, they had a picket fence, thin picket
Right.
spaced 6 inches apart.
But this was proved, this approval, though, has a solid retaining wall,
I don't know if that's the case.
right? Isn't that correct? The perimeter wall
privacy wall, it's
facing west in the final, well, not the final bill, but the one that was approved, right, was solid.
The preliminary development plan showed a mix of wall and, I think, a metal fence. So it was alternating.
And that was going to sufficiently divert the flow of water from the
No,
west.
that's above the grading, that's above the retaining wall. So there was,
So the retaining wall was always going to be there.
it would have had to have been, it just was not clarified.
Wish there had been some simulation of what we're going to see from Bellardo. We're trying to make guesses about, you can see roofs, you can see walls, what are you going to see? So, all right, thanks.
So just back to my original, did anyone want to hear from the applicant? Okay, any more questions of staff? Then we're open for discussion amongst us. Commissioner
I'll
Downfield,
I'll
sorry.
start off. As supportive as I want to be of these projects, and I think that corridor just begs for development, and it's beginning to come alive again. I've reviewed a lot of preliminary plans vis-à-vis final plans for PDDs, and I don't think I've ever seen as many changes to the plan as I'm seeing here. And not only changes staff identified, but Mr. Hirschbein identified several others, significant others. I didn't realize in the explanation of the staff report that the reason for the change on the west side of the subdivision was not just because of the very high retaining wall, but there's really a significant drainage issue that's being made a bit more simple by this change. I don't feel comfortable approving the revised development plan in as much as there are so many changes. The Paseo, for example, I think without the Paseos, you're looking at, I don't know if any of you remember, I'm one of the older people on the commission, something called Levittown. And Levittown was just the initial subdivision of modern homes, but there was no attention to detail, no attention to livability, quality of life. It was just home after home after home. And unless we vary this landscaping and add some changes to the streets, I don't think sidewalks do it. I think it becomes a very ordinary, too unified development. So I can't support the changes.
Okay, any more comments? Commissioner Hirschbein?
I can't support it for a couple of reasons. I've been looking at this project for several years, and like I said, I think this might be about the 10th or 12th iteration of it. And my initial concerns remain my concerns today, only they've been exacerbated since the final submittal, since the last approval. And that includes the setback of the second floor unit. I mean, as of today, we're getting changes on the unit design and the unit mix that has a significant impact on the view from the Tahquitz Tockwitz Creek Trail. And I don't think that's fair to us. I haven't even seen the drawing of the unit change yet, and we're supposed to make that on the fly up here. I think the developer has to comply with that requirement to have that second floor chunk on those units away from the creek. That was a very important part of the approvals that we went through. Originally, we had all 1 stories along the creek. And then when they came back with 2 stories, we said, well, okay, but, and now they're saying, okay, but, and then, but again. So that's one reason I can't support the change. Another one has to do with the landscape buffer. And again, going back to the original PDD, a PDD, as we know, is completely discretionary. There's no reason we have to approve a PDD. And as part of that process, we mandated a landscape buffer between the perimeter wall of the project, not on the property line, but set back from the property line, and a landscape buffer between that perimeter wall and the property line to mitigate the visual impact along that trail that this development would inevitably have. And they're reducing that setback by staff's statement of about 50, half of it's going away. There was another one, Wallet Creek, Oh, yeah. Again, going back to I too live on the south end, and I drive Bellardo a lot, and I love driving down that street and seeing that view out to the east, to the valley and to South Ridge. It's a gorgeous view. I would hate for the city to lose that view forever because these guys can't figure out how to drain a half a dozen backyards. This has nothing to do with that complicated drainage pattern that the city engineer was describing. He stated that it's independent of that. It just has to do with draining a few backyards. And if you have to look at a roof, let's see what that roof looks like. There's things we can do to make a parapet or some mitigating on that roof look. But I don't want to lose, as part of a PDD, I do not want to lose that view out to that valley. I don't, it's an amenity the city should not have to sacrifice for the sake of a half a dozen backyards. Or 10 backyards. I don't know what the number is.
I mean, I have to completely agree with that, because again, this is the kind of detail that sounds minor, but then when it's built and you're driving down Bellardi, it's like, what the heck? How come these houses are so tall, or the walls so tall, and you can't see anymore? That little detail is huge if it turns out not to work right. So I don't know if can we ask for simulations of what this thing would look?
We can ask for anything we want.
If you're driving down Bellardo and you take a look to the east, what you're going to see? The height of a car, not just on a ladder 15 feet high. If you're in a car, what will you see when you look east? I want to see that. So I'm not going to support it either.
And also I would mention that originally, or at some point in the process, there was a picket fence, steel picket fence, not a wall. It's not a retaining wall, it's a privacy wall they're proposing. And the picket fence then allowed the view out to the valley.
So I disagree with my fellow commissioners. When you look at the rendering that's here, the wall that was approved as part of the PDD, and I'm happy to pass this around again, versus the wall that's being proposed with the change, is minimal to none to change any visibility that was originally approved. I think this site has an enormous amount of challenges to it on many levels. I think it's gone through many companies looking at their due diligence. Far West has proven themselves in Palm Springs to not start a project and stop it, but to actually build out projects. They've actually bought projects that were in distress and built them out. I think part of the reason the Paseos are gone is the settlement agreement. I think the Paseos offered a safety issue for this particular part of the neighborhood, so I would be in support of the project. Commissioner Gardner, do you have anything you want to add?
You've given me a lot to think about.
So we have an option at this point, then. We need to make a motion on which way to direct or to go.
Mr. Chair, we've had a
Yes.
request from the applicant to speak. You may either entertain that request or you can continue with your deliberations.
Let's have the applicant come up and you introduce yourself and speak relatively briefly, but to the point that you're addressing.
With Far West Industries, as you mentioned, and thank you, we've built many projects out here. And just to name the last three off the top of my head, we're building Icon, we built Tuscany Heights and Murano, plus many, many more. And we don't stop a project. We will get this thing built. That's our point. Just a couple quick things. First, let's talk about the elevations. I see this as a troubling and struggling issue for you. But let me explain it this way. When you're driving on Bellardo and you look down at the property right now, it's about a 15-foot drop. So it's just a pit. So that is going to come up a few feet with the grading. But when you walk outside your back door, if you're one of the houses that back up to Bellardo, you're going to see a 7-foot retaining wall. On top of that, another 6-foot garden wall. So about a 12-foot wall. We've found that people just don't like that. It's aesthetically unpleasing. So we wanted to modify that and mitigate that, but that happened in conjunction with the grading. As Rick mentioned, the engineering required us to raise the pads up so we could get all of the water that's created on site all the way to the end of the property, filter it, clean it, scrub it, and then it goes into the wash and mixes with the other water. Why can't we do that as it is right now? If the pads are still as low as what was on your previously approved elevations, we don't have the fall to get from Bellardo all the way around and get inside to the flood. I don't know if you could put that slide up with the site. But as that's coming up, so we take it from the bottom left corner, top left corner, it's going to come all the way around and come toward the bottom and around. So we need positive flow, positive elevation to get that water from the top part to the bottom part. If those pads along Bellardo are still as low as they are, that means our starting point for our elevation is that much lower. And that's where we run into an issue where either we're pumping it back up because we've run out of elevation. We can only go as deep as it is possible to get into the flood channel, not any deeper. So this is an elevation issue for drainage that started the conversation. The massing issue. So I proposed 3 Plan 3s along the Tahquitz Canyon. Excuse me. For me, it's odd to be on. Talking in public is not my thing, I guess.
Would you like some water?
No, okay. Just give me a second. But point is that if you look at the left side and the top side, those are Plan 1, Plan 2, Plan 1, Plan 2, all the way around. Aesthetically, if you're driving through the community, it looks boring. It's not conducive of a nice community. The issue, from my understanding, and remember, we just purchased this project 6 months ago. All the other stuff with the lawsuit and everything else prior to us. The settlement with the Paseos, that was a settlement the city attorney agreed and signed off on. So that I don't think that should be an issue that really needs too much direction because it's approved in the settlement with the city. The point of the Plan 3s is to add 3 of them, and there's a plan that I think David Newell passed out that shows, yeah. It's the one with the 3 darker. It's the same Plan 3 as is already approved. We're not adding a new house or a new.
Okay, so I misunderstood.
Yeah, we're only asking to. The condition of approval said we couldn't put the 2-story houses if the back of the house was facing the wash or Bellardo, had to be inside the track. So of our 3 houses, the 2 that we placed are the ones that meet that criteria. That third one, the dark one, you see it all over the bottom part. So that's what I'm suggesting. We put 3 of those just to mix it up. And as far as, if you drive along Sandy Dunes by the KFC, there's actually a mound, a little hill that's along Sandy Dunes. So if you're driving and you're looking at our project, you're actually seeing a little berm, maybe a 8-foot-high berm. So you're not actually going to see this mass that I
You're talking about the Rock Garden, the former Rock Garden property?
It used to be there was a restaurant on our site. This
Yeah.
would be next to the KFC, between the KFC and Bellardo. It's a little berm. It
Okay.
stretches. It's there. Next time you drive, you'll see it, because I'm sure you'll be looking for it now. But with that kind of hides what I think was the concern of the City Council and the Planning Commission when this was heard in the past, and that is that we don't want to see this mass of just structures. That's why you wanted the houses pushed away toward the inside. Well, because of that berm, because of the Tahquitz Creek that separates that gap, you are talking about a setback of maybe 100+ feet between Sandy Dunes and our properties. So I don't really think you're going to notice that big mass that was the concern. So if we were allowed to add 3 Plan 3s up there, again, same plan as what's down below, it just mixes it up and makes it into a better community. That's the ask.
Can I ask a couple questions? Did you want to state more?
I think those were the biggest things for us.
So one thing we heard is along Bellardo, right? You're proposing a solid wall, where before it was solid along with a picket, I think was the term that we used. That picket would now be looking into the backyards. Would you be, and people could plant after they moved in there. Is that something you would be amenable to?
For them to plant?
No, to break up the wall instead of being a solid perimeter wall, to do part of the wall as transparent and part of the wall as solid.
Well, that's not a terrible problem. We could do a mix of like one and then the other, or whichever, solid wall, and mix that with the wrought iron, if that's the wish of the planning commission.
Just asking if and the other question I think that came up that I'd like to address is, we talked about on the north side of the site where Tahquitz is, there was a loss of some landscape area on the very north side of the site in the Tahquitz Wash, and maybe an explanation as to why that had to happen.
I wish I could tell you that I really understood where this loss came from, because I'm at a loss, to be honest, about where it came from. But I wasn't aware that we removed any additional landscape area from there.
Okay, great.
I have some questions.
Go ahead.
So just looking
Commissioner
at this site section at Lot 52 that we got today. So on Bellardo, the proposed building now looks like, well, maybe the roof is 3 feet over the wall, but it's a 10-foot ceiling. So are the window, you're going to still see the wall
Right
from
along
your.
Bellardo?
No, if you're in this dwelling and you're looking west, you're still going to see a wall, based on what this shows. The wall won't be as high as it was, but you'll still see it, unless you happen to be on the roof, then you can see over the wall, according to this. Unless the windows are at the very top, they're clerestory windows or somehow, then you could somehow see over the wall, but otherwise, you're still not going to see over the wall.
No, it's not about seeing over the wall. To be honest, it's about seeing the wall.
You still see the wall.
I agree with you. You're still going to see the wall, but the difference between seeing a 12-foot wall when you open your back door and a 6 or 7 or 8-foot wall, that's a huge difference to people. Again, that was only half the battle. The other was how we convey the water from the houses that back up to Bellardo. They have to have enough height to get the water to go through to the other side of the track around that loop, past the high density or the multifamily units to the entrance of the
Flynn,
wash.
So the council wanted this sort of solution? They wanted the pads raised so that they wouldn't have.
Yeah, there was a concern about the livability of those spaces between the houses that face Bellardo Road and the upper elevation of the street. In particular, Councilmember Mills was concerned about the backyards of those houses and how the plan related to being down in a pit, essentially. And so that was one of the things that the City Council asked them to look at as they went through the final plan development stage with the previous developer.
Was
So,
was
yeah,
that
was
part of a
concern.
resolution, or was that just a comment?
It was a comment at the city council meeting.
Okay, thank you very much for coming up. I very much appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Chair
Thank you for the
and
explanation.
Commissioners. Appreciate you allowing me to speak.
Mr. Chair, if I might, it seems like there are concerns in being able to make the finding that it's substantially consistent with the approvals that were granted previously. You have a couple of options, either moving forward as is, or you might request additional information. And in particular, the concern appears to be along the Bilardo Road frontage, both in terms of having sections that adequately describe what the condition will be there, as well as the wall that's proposed along Bilardo. And then secondly, looking at the Tahquitz Creek frontage, being able to compare what was originally approved versus what is proposed here. Those appear to be the two biggest areas of your concern. Relative to the Paseos, again, as was pointed out earlier, those were omitted because of the settlement agreement. And unfortunately, there's not much that we can do with those now. They made sense when the development was a gated development and there was a better ability to control those, but again, those are lost. So going back, there are really two areas that are of concern. Again, you could move forward with your decision today, or else you could request that the applicant provide additional information.
Commissioner Donenfeld?
I just have a question again. The settlement came out of a lawsuit that was filed.
Correct.
The city signed on to a settlement,
Correct.
and the city was willing to give up the Paseos in exchange for what?
For the...
To meet the court's direction. I mean,
Exactly. As part of giving up the Paseos, one of the things that we required was that that area that was used for the Paseos be directed back towards the street so that we would have sidewalks along the street.
what was so contentious about the Paseo to begin with? Was it a subject of the litigation
It was part of the litigation, yes.
in terms of too much
Concern-
green space? I mean,
No. It was in concern of, those became areas for homeless individuals to inhabit. There's no visibility of the Paseos from the backyards. So what they were creating was a safety issue.
and so this agreement was signed off between the litigant and the litigants, the city and the
Correct.
plaintiffs. So we can't fuss with that.
We can't fuss with the Paseos, no.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, but to your earlier point, Commissioner Donenfeld, it's not, yeah, I get, we can't have Paseos, buy Paseos, part of the litigation, they're gone. But to say that the open space that the Paseos provided and adding a 4 or 5 foot wide sidewalk is equivalent, to me, is a weak discussion. I think the point is that we would be looking for some compensatory open space within the development that would soften it up, to your point about it being too regimented. So in my motion, I would ask them to look at some open spaces, compensation for the open space that the Paseos provided.
Would that be possible? Because I assume the sidewalk requirement was put into the agreement as well.
Exactly.
I'm not saying instead of.
Well, you know, this
So,
this
if I
project
can
is sort of
make it
shoehorned
clear-
into this site. I don't know if there'd be any other
If I can
opportunities.
make it clear, the area that was used for the Paseos was then put out towards the street for the sidewalk, so there's no net loss.
Is it
in
sort of a
open
one-to-one
space.
exchange, really?
Yes.
But this motion may fail, but I will make a motion. Just to keep us moving, because it's 2:45. And I'll just make a statement before, very similar to the statement I made. This site has a lot of constraints to it. It's gone through an enormous amount of scrutiny on several bodies here at the city to try and get this site to work. I would make the motion to approve it, and I would make the motion to approve it with the addition that they asked for the 3 along Tahquitz to be approved, the addition. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, hearing none, the motion dies. Is there another motion?
I'll give it a try. I'll make a motion to ask the applicant to come back to us subject, I know it's not subject to, but it's with the following. requests, I guess. One would be a simulation of the view corridor preserved on Belardo, not with a solid privacy wall there, but with something that allows a view out across the valley. I would like to see staff show us if in fact some of the buffer on the north side was lost. I guess there's some dispute as to whether that's the case or not, and I'd like to see that clarified by staff because part of the approvals I thought had a minimum buffer there. I'd like to see, and I'll leave this up to Commissioner Donenfeld because I think he has a stronger opinion about this, but I'd like to see the gates in that wall so those residents could access the path.
On Tackwoods you're talking about?
Sorry?
Tackwoods Creek. Gates along Tackwoods Creek.
Correct. And I'd like to preclude the second stories facing the creek. I'd like to just take that off the table. Again, we're talking about to me, the PDD process is a significant part of the process is to ensure that the impact the project has to the surrounding community is appropriate, is beneficial, is aesthetically the right thing to do, not so much, and to a lesser extent, what the streetscape within the project looks like. So I would say that the impact to the Tackwoods Creek Trail is a more significant impact than having some limited variation on the internal street.
Okay, Commissioner Marucci wants to, is there a second, first of all?
Well,
You want a second?
do we need a second before I add to your motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Second.
It's been first and seconded.
Okay,
Open for
just
discussion.
because of the concern that the council raised and the applicant has, I'd like us to see a simulation if you were in the dwelling and you were looking west, what it would look like with the tall wall and what it would look like with the shorter wall, just to get a sense of it. In addition to having the other way around, when you're driving on Belardo and you're looking east, what you'll see from a car height, and not a giant SUV, a low car like mine. Not a bus.
Commissioner, do you approve the amendment to it?
What was, to just see, have a
Simulation
view,
from the
okay.
house, looking.
I just like to point out, if you look at the backyards between the Middle Street and the Northern Street, they're not named, but the backyards, I think there's 5 foot to a wall and then 5 foot to the next house. Probably that view is about similar to what a larger retaining wall would look like. Do you see what I'm saying?
But therefore, what?
Well, therefore, it's equivalent. They've already got the condition. Anyway, that's just my point.
So I guess the question is, do you want the
Yes.
fifth or not? Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, and we have a second, and we have an amendment to that motion. And do we need those 5 points read back to us?
Well, I'd also like to see out the back of the houses where there's this minimum backyard, and their streets are not identified, but it's the middle,
A and C.
east-west street. Oh, it is, A and C?
A and C.
This one and this one.
Right, that's A and C.
Okay, so what does it look like looking out that backyard to the next house as a gauge as to what, the other houses are? Is it worse, is it better? So we have some idea.
So add that to number 5.
It kind of modifies Mr. Maruzzi's.
Are you in agreement? It expands yours, is what it does.
As long as I still have my request, I'm happy.
Yeah, okay.
Director Flynn, Director Fay, did you want to reread number 5 at least? Which is,
I don't know that I can. What I will ask is that I will meet with Commissioner Hirschbein after the meeting just to clarify exactly what he wants to see. We'll look at a site plan and do that. I do have the other conditions written down in your motion, and the motion is to continue the item pending these items coming back to you.
That was my question. This is not a motion to deny. This is a motion to continue,
Correct.
because that's important for the applicant to know.
and are we continuing this to a date certain?
I would like to see that we don't do a date certain, just to make sure the applicant has adequate time to prepare the exhibits for you.
So we have a first on the floor, we have a second. Can I call for the vote? Motion passes unanimously. Great, thank you very much. Thank you to the applicant for being here. I guess we'll see you shortly again with some clarifications.
He's going to talk to me. Let's see.
Next, we move on the agenda is a discussion item. It's a request by the City of Palm Springs to amend the chapters 91, 92, 93, and 94 of the Palm Springs zoning code relative to the development standards for cannabis uses. We're going to run this similar to a public hearing in that we're going to allow the public to speak for 3 minutes per speaker. But before we do that, can we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. In terms of our discussion today, I'm just going to do a very brief background. I'm not going to go into the level of detail that I did during our previous study session. I'll talk about the proposed modifications to our cannabis ordinance. Then we'll take public input, Planning Commission discussion, and we'll look for direction from the Planning Commission at the end of this discussion today. In terms of the background on the regulations, I just want to remind the Commission and members of the public that our regulations relative to cannabis businesses are contained in 2 separate areas of the city's code. First of all, in Chapter 5, we have the regulations that pertain to how cannabis businesses are operated. And then secondly, in the zoning code, we have the where the cannabis businesses may be located. In terms of amending the code, Chapter 5 is amended by the City Council, so they are the only ones who review and amend that portion of the code. It does require 2 public hearings. The zoning code, however, has a lengthier process in that the Planning Commission makes recommendations to the City Council, and then the City Council holds public hearings on the item. There have been some changes to this anticipated process since we had the study session, and I just wanted to go over the process that we'll be going through in terms of amendments to our code. First of all, there was a stakeholder meeting held back in July. Then we held our study session on September the 11th. We're having a discussion on proposed amendments to the zoning code today. And then we will have our formal public hearing at the next Planning Commission meeting, which will be on October the 10th. What we are looking for on October the 10th is that you will finalize your recommendations to the City Council on that date. The City Council Subcommittee intends to hold another meeting with the stakeholders. We anticipate that that would be in mid-October. And then the first discussion of both the zoning regulations and the changes to the municipal code, Chapter 5, would be the City Council meeting of 10/23, October 23rd. And the City Council may choose to hold additional public hearings. So again, that process has lengthened and changed since we last discussed this at the study session on the 11th. In terms of the cannabis zoning regulations, one of the things I want to point out and make clear to both the Planning Commission and the public is that proposed changes to our zoning code are not retroactive. As a general rule, changes to zoning regulations are not retroactive. In terms of any applications that are in process, the City Council has a policy decision to exempt those applicants from the new regulations. However, that's not a discussion for us to have as the Planning Commission. That's something that the City Council will decide at a later date. And so I just want to make it clear to both the Planning Commission and the public that any decision on applications that are in process would be a decision of the City Council and not of the Planning Commission here today. The City Council Subcommittee has asked the Planning Commission to look at 4 specific things. First of all is the issue of saturation and separation distance issues. Secondly, they've asked you to look at the waiver criteria that we look at relative to separation distance. Third, they've asked you to look at notification requirements for new cannabis businesses. And then fourth, they've asked you to make a recommendation on architectural review requirements. Let me start with the first issue of saturation and separation. In particular, City Council identified that there were saturation issues in both the Desert Highland Gateway and Demuth Park neighborhoods, and there is a moratorium that is currently in place relative to new applications in those areas. In addition, we've had a number of separation distance waivers in the Palm Canyon corridor, and so they wanted us to look at those issues as well. You all discussed the matter at the study session, and you made a number of recommendations to staff. And so we've prepared a draft ordinance which reflects the recommendations that you had made to us on September the 11th. Based on that, what we have proposed in the ordinance before you today is to modify the locations for where cultivation may occur and for where type 6 and type 7 manufacturing may occur. And let me just remind you, in terms of manufacturing, type 6 and type 7 manufacturing licenses, and those are the state license categories, are those that deal with extraction processes. And extraction processes and cultivation were the 2 key uses that our consultant identified as potentially having impacts relative to odors. And so again, based on your discussion on September 11th, we're looking at changing where those may be located. In terms of cultivation and then the manufacturing uses, I have a map here showing the I-10 corridor area. And this is what we discussed as being a possible cannabis overlay zone where we would like to encourage those uses to locate. And so what we're proposing is that cultivation be limited to this area along the freeway. And in particular, we're looking at the EI, the M2, and the M1P zones, which would be along the freeway. And so again, just highlighting here, if I can do that, this is the EI in the brown, the M2 is the purple, and then the M1P is the green that you see here, and then further down here. Just to orient you, this is the I-10 freeway corridor as you move through the valley. This is the Indian Canyon intersection with I-10 here, and then this is Gene Autry right down here. And so those are the areas where cultivation and manufacturing would be allowed. Looking at the other industrial zones in the city, I've tried to highlight those in white, and I realize that this map is a little bit confusing to look at. I'll try and point out some of the major areas here on the map. Let's see if I can get my pointer to work here. So this is the Desert Highlands Gateway area here. Down here is Sunny Dunes and South Palm Canyon. Over here in this area, we have Demuth Park. And then as Gene Autry continues up along the airport, we have the airport vicinity, Vista Chino. And so those are the industrial areas within what I call the central city core. And so that's where we've had concerns about the impacts of cultivation and manufacturing. And so it's proposed that we don't allow cultivation in those areas, and that on the manufacturing, we exclude the type 6 and type 7 manufacturing. So that's the extraction process. However, in those areas, we would allow the type N, which is the infusion, and the type P, which is packaging. And so those would still be allowed in the industrial zones with a conditional use permit. In the industrial zones, we are also proposing to have separation distance requirements based on your discussion from September the 11th. There would be a requirement of 500 feet of separation between all cannabis facilities in those zones, and then a minimum of 1,000 feet separation for the cultivation and manufacturing uses from residential zones. But again, no cultivation would be allowed except in the I-10 corridor. In looking at how these separation distance requirements apply to the distinct areas, let me just go through those with the maps that we've prepared for you. The bubble, if you can see here, let me just go to the pointer. So this dark line that you see around here, this is showing the 500-foot separation between cannabis businesses. So based on a 500-foot distance separation from the existing cannabis businesses in Desert Highland Gateway area, there wouldn't be any additional cannabis businesses that would be permitted. Secondly, if you apply the 1,000-foot separation distance on top of that, and the 1,000-foot separation is that shaded area that you see here, that's 1,000 feet from residential zones. So based on those two separation distance requirements, there wouldn't be any additional businesses that would be allowed in the Desert Highland Gateway area. Moving on to Demuth Park, similarly here, you see with the 500-foot separation and the 1,000-foot separation from residential, there's only a limited number of parcels where you could have additional cannabis businesses, and those are the red arrows that I'm showing here. There's 4 parcels that are just outside of that separation distance area along Gene Autry. So that would significantly limit any new additional businesses going in the Demuth Park area. Sunny Dunes, you see the same thing. Because of the residential separation and the separation from the businesses that are there wouldn't be any new additional cannabis businesses allowed. And then in the Airport Vista Chino area, there are a limited number of parcels where new cannabis businesses would be allowed based on the residential separation or the separation from the existing businesses there. So you can see how those two separation distances work in addressing the issues of saturation in those areas. Let me go on to the second area, which is in our commercial zones and primarily in the Palm Canyon area. So as we showed you last time, by having a 500-foot separation distance around lounges and dispensaries in the Palm Canyon corridor and along Indian Canyon, there's limited area where you would be able to have additional dispensaries and lounges. And I've shown those areas with the red highlight there. So using a 500-foot separation distance, again, that limits the amount of new businesses that you could have in those corridors.
What's that most southern circle? Just the area? I can't figure out where that is.
That area down there that Mr. Hirschbein is asking about, sorry if I can get the pointer down there, that is South Palm Canyon around the intersection of Mesquite and South Palm Canyon.
Thank you.
So those are the separation distance. Let me move on next to the waiver criteria. Currently, in terms of obtaining a waiver, the City Council is the body that grants waivers. They do it through an administrative minor modification process, but we don't have any real standardized criteria for those types of waivers. What we're proposing is the following list, and we heard comments on the proposed options we had last time, so we fleshed those out a little bit more. In terms of the proposed waiver criteria, what we're proposing is, number one, that the building or property has been vacant for a period of at least 3 years, so they haven't been able to lease it to tenants. Secondly, the applicant would need to demonstrate that the use is necessary to serve the needs of residents in that particular census tract. And so that they'll have to show that there aren't adequate facilities to serve the population within that tract, similar to what we do with alcohol licenses. Third, they'd need to demonstrate that there's no undue concentration of cannabis uses on a particular block or street frontage. And so what we would look at is the immediate block where the use is proposed to be located. Fourth, in terms of the operator, we'd look at the qualifications of the operator. Do they have experience? Do they have any record of having violations? Fifth, they would need to have an approved security program approved by our police department. And then the sixth would be that the proposed use is no closer than 500 feet to any residential zone. So that is the proposed specific criteria that we would forward to you based on your comments at the study session. In terms of notification requirements, currently no notification is required for cannabis uses that are approved administratively. Notification isn't required for distance waivers, although we have done it at the request of City Council. And then the only time that you do get mailed notices or have a posting of the property is when a conditional use permit is required. So that's the current requirements. What we're proposing, based on your discussion, is that both a mailed notice and a sign posting would be required for both administrative approvals and for discretionary approvals. In terms of the mailed notice, it would require that the notice go out to 1,000 feet for property owners and tenants, and it would be 10 days prior to the action. And then a sign posting of the property would be required 30 days prior to any action. What we would do with the sign posting, it either has to be a freestanding sign or it could be posted in the window of an existing building if it's visible from the public right-of-way. One of the things I want to say on the mailed notice, we did discuss a longer time period. However, it becomes a little bit difficult in that for all of our other mailed notices, for all the other applications that we do, we only do a 10-day notice, which is in line with state law. While we could do a longer notice, it becomes a little bit confusing for staff and for our applicants in doing a different notice than what we have for all other standardized applications. And so that's the one caveat that I will propose to you there. Architectural review, currently architectural review is only required for new buildings or for major alterations. The review is done by the AAC and is then forwarded to the City Council. Planning Commission does not participate in that process unless it's part of a major architectural application. Signage for cannabis businesses is approved administratively unless any waivers are requested. What we're proposing based on your input is that architectural review of the facade treatment and signage would be required for all cannabis facilities in all zones. And then that would be reviewed by the AAC, the Architectural Advisory Committee, and the City Council. Now, there is one exception to that in our code up in the area north of the freeway in the EI and the M2 zone. Cannabis facilities, agricultural facilities are exempt from architectural review by our existing code. So those are the four things that the City Council wanted you to look at. As I had mentioned last time, there's certain administrative changes that we're also proposing to make. First of all, relative to the references to cannabis uses, we're no longer distinguishing between recreational and medical, and so we'll be making those changes in our code. All odor control requirements will be moved to Chapter 5 of the code. Parking requirements have been added for all cannabis uses. We have also proposed to clarify the development standards for cannabis lounges, as that was somewhat confusing in our zoning requirements. And then finally, the limitations on cultivation canopy will be aligned with state law. Going back again to the process, this is a discussion today. We will have a formal public hearing on October the 10th, at which time we'll request that you make a recommendation to City Council. City Council is intending to hold a stakeholder meeting in mid-October with the first City Council hearing on both the changes to Chapter 5 and the zoning code at the end of October. That concludes my presentation to you. Again, I apologize for the length of it. I just wanted to make sure I was relatively thorough in explaining the proposed ordinance that we have before you. And with that, I'll go ahead and take your questions.
I appreciate the thoroughness on behalf of the commission. What I'd like to do is, we're going to have another, per se, bite at this apple today, and we have a lot of people in the audience that are here to speak. So if there's questions of staff, I'd like to just run from my left to my right and ask questions of staff, and then open it up so that people that are here can actually have an opportunity to speak. We do have to be out of here by 4:30. They need to move all of the equipment out of here and move it over to the Plaza Theater for the State of the City address. So there is some urgency to be fast.
I'll speak fast. In the tables that you gave us, where it says manufacturing, do we assume all of those are type 6 and 7? Or should you distinguish that?
No, on page 4 of your staff report, is that where you're?
No, I'm looking at these tables. The ones that have the maps. that says-
Oh, okay, with the
Well,
ones with the maps.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our cannabis office, our Office of Special Programs, wasn't able to distinguish those manufacturing uses for us because they aren't currently collecting all of that information for all applicants, so I wasn't able to provide that information.
Well, some of these are actually operating, so they should at least know those.
Yeah, we should have those, but again, they didn't have a complete list for me, so I wasn't able to put that in the
You know, I think that it's helpful because there is a big difference, right?
Yeah.
In terms of what we're talking about.
I'll try and do that for your hearing on the 10th.
The other thing is, you show the administrative permit, whether it's issued or application, but you don't show the CUP, whether it's been approved or not, right? 'Cause
We will try and update that on the maps.
okay, and in the table.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, I was told that in the I-10 corridor north of the freeway, the land is primarily owned by wind power companies. And that may be beyond your purview to know that, or one or the other, but I think that needs to be at least explored, because if we're putting all our eggs in the I-10 basket, we should at least know who owns the land, and whether or not they would even consider selling it for cannabis.
You have the M2 district that's shown in purple here on the map, and the M1P. Those generally are not owned by wind companies. We already have a number of cannabis businesses in the M2 area.
What about E1?
Excuse me?
E1
EI.
or EI?
Yeah.
That is, you're saying that's agricultural?
There are some agricultural uses there, yes.
So none of this is wind areas?
No,
wind-
there is some that is wind area, but it's a combination. It's not all wind area.
Okay, but how much of it is owned by wind power and how much of it is available for cannabis?
So as you look at the M2 and the M1P, so in the purple and the green, those generally are not owned by wind companies. EI, you get a mixture.
Because that's the biggest chunk is EI.
And cultivation uses would be allowed there.
So is there, and again, that's probably not our purview, but it just seems to me if the council is discussing wanting to put most of cultivation and manufacturing in this area, we need to know if the wind power companies would be interested in selling land, unless it's a checkerboard. I mean, I don't understand how much of it is wind and where it is and what's open, and is it a patch?
I will say this, that both agricultural uses are allowed on the wind properties as well.
Well, I got that, but what if the wind power companies don't want it? So
Again,
therefore, it's not really that available.
Yeah.
If it was owned by the city, sure.
But as you can see from the map, there is adequate area in the M2 and the M1P.
Okay.
Commissioner Donenfeld.
I just want to, with respect to, I know we are limiting cultivation and manufacture to a very specialized area, but we're still allowing it to occur, for example, in M2, if you have a CUP, correct?
Yes, and M2 is only in the I-10 corridor. It's not in the central city core.
So I'm trying to think when the 1,000 feet from a residential neighborhood would kick in if we're moving, unless there may well be by I-10 some residential neighborhoods, and it would kick in there.
Generally,
But-
it's not going to kick in the I-10 corridor.
Right.
Where it does is when there are type N or type P manufacturing uses in the city core, in the map that I'm showing here. So that's when the 1,000-foot separation becomes important.
And refresh my memory, Flynn, when we're talking about type N and type P, we're talking about what kind of industry?
We're talking about infusion and packaging. And again, our consultant has identified
Right.
those as having the least impact of the cannabis uses.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, forgive me, I was not at the study session, but I do have a couple questions real quickly. Part of what we've looked at in the past when a applicant wants to go to an existing building is the adequacy of the envelope of that building. Would taking architectural review away from us in those cases prohibit us from looking at the envelope aside from aesthetic issues?
We're not taking architectural review away from you. It's only for existing facilities that it would go to AAC and City Council. Any new construction would come to you. Conditional use permits will still come to you.
No, exactly. We looked at existing buildings and the adequacy of the existing buildings, the envelope of the existing building.
Yeah,
We imposed certain requirements, room in room and sealing the stucco, et cetera. Would we still have that ability in existing buildings?
You didn't do that as part of architectural review. You did that as part of a conditional use permit, and you would still have that
thank you.
ability.
Okay. What is a cultivation canopy? I haven't heard that before.
Cultivation canopy refers to the square footage that is used specifically to grow the plants.
Okay. And is the waiver criteria that you were listing, is that only applicable to dispensaries and lounges or for any type of cannabis-related facility?
As City Council currently has it, it would be for any cannabis facility. One of the things that we haven't had in the past is we haven't had separation distance between cannabis facilities in our industrial zones, and that's something that would be added. So the separation distance that's proposed and the additional waiver criteria would be applicable not only to dispensaries and lounges, but also to manufacturing uses, distribution uses, testing facilities in industrial zones.
So, as proposed, do the distance requirements between facilities apply to the area on the far north end?
They wouldn't apply on the I-10 corridor, but everywhere else in the city they would.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner.
In terms of the notification process and extending that to 1,000 feet, you mentioned in the staff report that there was an increase in fees, and it was pretty large increase in fees just recently. Do you have a sense of how much more that would go up? And then also just the impact on staff and their ability to actually get these notices out?
What I would expect is that by increasing the notification radius, what you would see is probably about a 25 to 35% raise in those fees by having the expanded distance. It creates both additional staff time in terms of the number of envelopes that go out, et cetera, but that is incorporated into the fee itself.
Thank you.
Flynn, I just have one question. We got several pieces of communication, and some of them are about the where, and some of them are about the how, and some of them mix both of them up in the communication we have. But one of the letters was that a lounge can't share a door with the dispensary. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes, that is the language that's currently in our code, and it has created a number of issues in that a lounge also has to have a licensed dispensary. And so what we've done in the zoning code is essentially we've put a barrier between those two uses. What I'm proposing to do to correct that is to state that a lounge and a dispensary may be connected internally, because again, you need to have that relationship. And so we are correcting that situation.
Great. With that, I'd like to actually open it up to the public to speak. What I would ask is that the first person that comes up, if the next person would the second person would just queue behind that person so it goes very, very quickly. I want to thank everyone that's here and anyone who's not here. We received an enormous amount of communication on this, and I want to thank, and the communication was actually very good, so I want to thank people for that communication as well. If you are going to come up and reference a letter that you had wrote, just let us know. It's appreciative. So with that, I'll take the first speaker, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Tempe Essel, and I'm here as a rookie member of the Cannabis Work Group and a concerned citizen of Palm Springs. I attended the City Council meeting on July 9th and the Planning Commission workshop on September 11th, and I listened to my fellow citizens raise their concerns about the smells that were emanating from the production facilities. Our wonderful city is comprised of many neighborhoods and have been here for many generations. No one should be forced to stay indoors because of these odors. Children should not be exposed to these smells in their neighborhoods. Cannabis is a new business, and it appears we are going through a learning curve on how to coexist. There seems to be a strong coordination between the staff report and the work group findings, specifically the Stop the Proliferation, creating the green zone in the I-10 corridor, cap the number of manufacturing and cultivation facilities. The distance requirements, the neighbors feel that a 1-mile distance from neighborhoods would be a better situation. Develop and monitor odor control standards using the most up-to-date technology available. It's great that Palm Springs is one of the 2 cities in California to be using the nasal rangers. It's great that we will soon have a 24-hour hotline for odor complaints, and the new fines and the 3-strike rule for those facilities that fail to comply with these standards is fantastic. Notifying the neighborhood organizations when the permits are submitted and update according to the process would be even a better situation. I know that's now available online, and if people make themselves available to that information. So it's my hope that by considering these changes to the zoning ordinance, we will preserve and nurture all neighborhoods in Palm Springs. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you do me a favor and change, I'm sorry, can you change the screen so that they can see the amount of time they have, so they might not feel so rushed? So they get an idea. There you It's 3. Great, thank you.
Hello, Commissioners and Chair and Vice Chair. I'm actually here in opposition of the Planning Commission staff report, in particular to the area near Vista Chino that backs into the Palm Springs Airport. I think that in regards to the issues relating to density, setback, cultivation, and the manufacturing type 6 and 7 should be continued to be allowed. In particular, we purchased a building at 1251 Montalvo Way, which has had some conversations here with the city. And before we acquired the building, we started our due diligence in January of 2018. We spoke to the fire department, the police department, the planning department, and the city attorney's office. Followed up with multiple emails. I've got some things that I'd like to pass on to you guys, hopefully if you could take that. But we did extreme due diligence on this because we did not want to have any issues with odor control or ask for any variances or any special considerations. I do want to just bring to everyone's awareness, I think everyone knows it, but maybe not in such detail. This property backs into the airport. It's also in an M1 zone. Everyone is talking about, the impact that it's having on, there's been health issues that there's no scientific data to back up. It's been brought up. There's been issues about property values being diminished. From a real estate standpoint, and I'm in real estate, every homeowner that is around that community had to sign disclosure that said they're next to an industrial zone. They had to sign a disclosure that says they're next to an airport, followed up with a mandated state booklet that comes with all the exact details relating to those disclosures that are required for every homeowner to sign off before they purchase their house. And this has been going on for over 30 years. Now, I'm not saying that to set them aside or diminish anything that they say, and particularly the odor control, because I'm concerned about that too, and I can understand their complaint about that. And since the hearing on July 24th, where I was able to hear all the issues, and I'm prepared to address those at my upcoming hearing, the number one thing that did have merit to it was odor control. We've done a significant amount of research on odor control and are looking forward to presenting our case on that because we will have the most state-of-the-art odor control systems that anyone in the Coachella Valley has seen to date. Lastly, I just wanted to close out that when we purchased this building after doing all this due diligence, we've invested over $4 million in cash and hard money loans to do this transaction. We've are 3/4 of the way through upgrading our power to the tune of $750,000. This will have a significant financial hardship on us, and we would just like our cases to be heard. We think that this property should be grandfathered in under the old code, and hope that you will give that some consideration. Can I give you some information that I have here for the council?
Certainly, you can hand it, and she'll pass it out. That'd be great. Okay, if I can ask you just a question. That is the building that has several multi-tenants in it, including the pool store, PSP, the pools?
There's no pool store, but there's multiple tenants.
There's multiple tenants in it.
5% of the building is already cannabis.
Okay, thank you.
Which will make it really hard to rent to someone else if we have to go that route.
Hi, just,
Hello, not already. I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that I'd said at the earlier session on the 11th. First of all, the industrial area in Demuth Park, according to reports I've seen, is already highly saturated with both dispensaries and then growing facilities. And I have a strong feeling that the distance requirement should be more than 1,000 feet because, of course, Vela Road, which separates the residential from the industrial park, is, wide open. So anything that emanates from the industrial park is going to undoubtedly drift over into residential area. The other thing, I feel that the distance requirement as proposed should be moved to at least 1 mile. That would exclude then any additional facilities in Demuth Park. And I think moving facilities, growth facilities out to the I-10 corridor would be a very good idea for the present and for future growth of the city. And finally, on the notification, I think it needs to be more than just 1,000 feet again. I live more than 1,000 feet from that park, and I would like to be notified as early as possible about any proposed new facilities going in. And I think that's important. I happen to head up the Demuth Park Neighborhood Organization. I'd like to be able to get the information out to all of our residents at an earlier time. So thank you for your time.
thank you.
Hi, guys. Just thank you for your time. I'm actually a real estate investor, not by choice, but I was a software engineer and I had a stroke. I had to make some health choices, not a recommended health choice plan, by the way. I wanted to talk a little bit about mainly the city council recommendation that you guys hopefully will do about grandfathering in businesses. Since I also have already invested in a building that's in an M1 zone and wouldn't meet 1 mile restrictions, it would create a large financial hardship for me, obviously. We've invested in the building. I was excited to invest in this area. I bought a property in the desert. I moved here. But, one thing that, I truly believe that the issues can be handled with technology. Odor control, I want to be a good neighbor as a landlord, and I wouldn't want to be next to something that smelled bad, and I would have that problem too. But when you're making, I would just ask, when you're making your decisions, to take technology into effect, and if it is a building in an area and odor control can be proven that it isn't going to impact anybody, I would think that maybe you could make an exception, especially for properties that have already been purchased and people have invested money based on the rules that were existing at the time. So just thank you for your consideration. Hope you guys have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Hey everybody. My name's Ryan Myra. I'm the Chief Operating Officer Row House, SB New Heights. We are an applicant here in Palm Springs for a dispensary and a consumption lounge. Honestly, my main thing, I just wanted to show my support for the new ordinance. I think that it makes sense for everyone getting involved in the city. I've done work in cities before where new ordinances have come out and it's created a lot of problems and a lot of issues. And with these new changes, I think they do make sense. Specifically, some of the big things is with that, dispensary and lounge, being able to connect them internally. The confusion that was in some of the verbiage of the old ordinance made things more difficult for us, not just in operation-wise, but also, when enjoyment for customers coming in, and safety and security. When we have to move outside of our own building to get around to go to places, it makes it more difficult for us and the customer and it just doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form. So we did submit a letter from the row house. My counsel did, Lauren Mendelssohn, so you should see that. But yeah, we're in support of it, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Karina Romero, and I'm here on behalf of High Road Consulting Group. We're based out in Desert Hot Springs. I just wanted to bring light to the following regarding the draft ordinance. In regards to the waiver program, requiring a building to be vacant for 3 years is a bit too rigid, and it does not allow City Council some discretion in determining the vacancy of a building. The number of buildings in Palm Springs that are compliant to the current and new ordinance are few, if any. Since adding a length of time is necessary, then we would encourage a minimum of 1 year. Businesses come and go, and if a property becomes available and all it needs is it needs to be compliant is a waiver, it should be granted, given that the property and the applicant meet all the other requirements. Establishing a time limit of at least a year will allow businesses to occupy buildings instead of the city having empty buildings. In addition, it would be unfair for the city to say that in order to qualify for the waiver program, an applicant must have at least 2 years of experience operating a licensed cannabis facility. This is beneficial to those with the financial ability to open a secondary or third location versus appealing to those wanting to begin building their business in the industry. In the previous Planning Commission study session, there was a public comment made regarding the lack of people of color being able to go through the application process due to its high requirements, and adding this detail to the waiver program would further hinder small businesses and socioeconomic equity applicants. Under the draft ordinance, specifically pages 14 and 15, it states that cannabis facilities in any zone that have submitted a complete and pending land use entitlement application and is pending review to the draft ordinance being adopted are exempt from following separation distance requirements. We would first like to suggest extending the date from October 23rd, 2019 until the end of the year, and changing the language from land use entitlement application to regulatory permit application. Applicants who are currently undergoing this process or are waiting for their background report results to return, which can take up to 4 weeks to complete, have also spent time and money in creating a compliant regulatory permit application. The application requires things like a site and floor plan, which means applicants must hire an architect, a secured property, which means an applicant is either leasing or buying the property, as well as an odor control plan, which would require expertise help. In addition to these expenses, those who have submitted a regulatory permit application have paid fees to the city in order to begin the review process. The application alone is $4,092, and that does not include the background fee, odor control reviews, site inspections, and other services. Applicants who are following the current regulations implemented by the city should be considered legally non-conforming uses, given they are playing by the rules, and extending the deadline of October 23rd will allow the applicants currently in the beginning stages of the review to be completed.
Thank you. The question was, ma'am, can we make a copy of that? Are you willing to give that up? One of the commissioners asked if you just give it over here. That would be great. Oh. The benefits of submitting a letter. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Director, Commissioners, staff. My name is Stephen Viatic, and I'm the owner of Reefer Madness. I've carefully reviewed and studied the draft zoning amendments and their impact to cannabis business. I am extremely concerned because pending land use entitlement applications in the M1 zone are not being addressed. Specifically, on page 8 of the proposed ordinance, under M1 zone regulations, the text proposes to strike out cultivation and type 6 manufacturing entirely. This would potentially stop the processing of my CUP application and others. I submitted CUP application 5.1487 on June 27th, 2019. Currently, and since around January of this year, I leased 2 tenant units in the Demuth Park M1 zone. At these locations, I already have a state-approved application for a cannabis microbusiness license for a tiny, small-scale manufacturing cultivation, and I also hold a state retail license for a dispensary and lounge. I selected the M1 zone for my business because it permits all types of cannabis use, and it is the appropriate zone. The proposed manufacturing type is type 6, non-volatile, non-solvent-based mechanical press-only extraction, contained in a room of approximately 242 square feet in area. The proposed cultivation is contained in a room about 325 square feet in area. It worries me that the proposed zoning amendment could affect my CUP application, which is for a small business, to the same degree as an application for a 10,000 square foot proposed cultivation facility. 325 square feet and 10,000 square feet are very different in magnitude and have very different potentials for odor. I have an odor control plan that has been approved by 2 separate odor consultants. These are the city's original odor consultant and the new odor consultant employed by the city. My project is tiny compared to other projects. I'd like to propose that staff and the commission please consider adding a line under uses permitted by conditional use permit, allowing cultivation and type 6 manufacturing in the M1 zone. If there is already a submitted land use entitlement application filed before the adoption of the proposed zoning amendment. If this is not possible, I'd like to ask that staff and the commission please consider defining small-scale type 6 manufacturers and tiny cultivators such as myself, and allowing small-scale operations, especially if they're already in the application pipeline. I would define cultivation or manufacturing facility less than 3,000 square feet as something of small scale. My odor control systems are designed with fail-safes in mind, so if one component fails, another component is already doing the job adequately without help from any other components. My design also takes into account pressure differentials, double wall isolation techniques.
Thank you. I just would suggest to you that we are not making a decision on those that are in the queue, that you really follow the process through to the city council who will be making that decision. Certainly.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joy Brown Meredith, and first of all, I really want to thank staff. This has been an incredibly complicated process, and they've been very kind in talking to me about it, because it does make me a little bit nervous, and I know that Flynn has stated today that everything that has already been approved won't be under these new regulations here. I just want to tell you that I have always supported the notification. I've always supported the residential separation. I actually don't know when exactly the residential separation disappeared from the ordinance, because it was quite a surprise for me. It happened sometime maybe in 2016 or 17, but you know, there needs to be a balance here between what the needs are of the residents, and as a cannabis business owner, I've always respected that. One of my locations is so far up north that they actually had to make the map bigger in Palm Springs to make sure that my project would be on there. So I do have something that's off of the freeway out of respect for the residents. That's why I chose it. And then my other project that is also licensed, but I would need a CUP for, might fall into this little bit of wiggle room here. But I just want to say too that, you know, it's possible to be a good neighbor. Some people have really taken advantage of this, and that's why we have so many upset residents, is because they were not good neighbors, and they chose to be that way. And as the gentleman before me that just spoke, I think that it would be a good idea if you considered the size of the cultivation and for type 6 manufacturing as well, because it is true, you know, a 10,000 square foot building is going to have a lot more problems there than you are if you have a smaller size cultivation as far as odor or anything else goes. So, I mean, in this case, really, size does matter, and I think that you need to look at that. So I just really want to say thank you so much for all these meetings and taking this all into consideration. It's a very complicated thing, trying to really make sure that residents and the businesses could find some sort of happy medium here. I know I never want to have a situation where I am disturbing any of the neighbors, and that means a lot to me. And I hope that you're able to find the balance that's needed here. This is a toughie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shane Canby. I'm the CFO at Evolved Engineering, which I own with my wife. It's located in the Demuth Park area, just south of Mesquite. Our main concern is that, seeing as we're at the CUP approval portion of the process, that we do get grandfathered in for consideration, if I'm understanding what you said at the beginning earlier. We would like to see that. It seems like the wording on the proposal is not as specific as it could be in that regard. I know you said it's up to the city council, but it'd be nice if it was encoded in the actual wording. Considering the time and considerable expense that we've put in the last couple of years to get to this point, we would hate to see any portion of what we had planned not be allowed. We've specifically purchased a building in the M1 zone because there are no distance requirements and every activity is permitted there. And we proceeded with our due diligence and acted in good faith, getting our administrative permit and our state license, and we submitted our CUP a month ago. So we would just like to make sure that that's considered. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Next.
Yes, my name is Harold Ivan Smith. I'm a new resident. I'm against the marijuana thing totally, the whole kit and caboodle. I cannot fathom why this community needs this expansion of marijuana. But I won't go there, that's my own personal beliefs. But I've heard I'm supposed to trust the technology. Really? Does anyone remember the Titanic? The greatest ship ever built, and it sank. You know, how many lawyers make wonderful livings, after somebody puts something in someone's body, trust the technology, and then it's wrong. And so you have all these medical problems, you have people dying from it. So what we've heard is trust the technology. Well, then you got to go back and go trust the people who are selling the technology. So I'm not sure I'm real excited about that. What are their credentials? You can find someone to tell you anything you want if you're willing to pay enough money for it. The third thing I think that really troubles me is that, I don't give a rat's ass of what you've spent to buy buildings to build marijuana. It's called risk. That's part of American capitalism. You come in, you could have put your money all these other places, but you chose here. It is like a gambling casino. So that you've put this money in, too bad. Tell me about it. And I'm sorry that young people are putting their money in, and we spent $70,000 or $50,000. It's called risk. And that's a big part of business. And it's back to that thing, though, of the technology. Because it's going to be beautiful if we trust the technology that these people claim they're paying for, and then the smell or the odor happens. So then you go, well, where are these experts who we were to trust on odor? They're out of here. They're on to the next community trying to sell their expertise. This is an important issue. It needs lots of governance. And this is a great city. And there's no point in just rushing into this and saying, come on to Palm Springs, bring your money, buy buildings. I just don't buy that. I'm a new resident. I love Palm Springs. But I don't want to have the experience of waking up someday going, my God, what is that smell? And I don't want people coming to visit me from around the world getting off at our airport and going, what is that smell? Trust the technology? I'm not so sure. That's the wisest approach for Palm Springs.
Thank you. Right on 3 minutes. Mayor Dean.
For the Ascena Neighborhood Organization, and I want to thank the Planning Commission, thank you for having this Planning Commission study session on September 11th. It gave our residents the opportunity to explain their issues to you, and it appears you were listening, which was evident in the recommendations in the staff report. You have addressed our concerns, and we agree with the recommended modifications to the planning ordinance. Restricting the cannabis cultivation and manufacturing to the I-10 corridor is a pro-business approach that ensures schools and residences are not adversely impacted. We are aware that there are several cannabis business applications in the pipeline, and we would recommend that you or the City Council extend these modifications in your staff report to include them. We also request that you include language that would require all cannabis businesses now and in the future to use the latest technologies for odor control. This would ensure that old, outdated, and ineffective devices are not used. Thank you for addressing the notification process. We believe this is an important step in keeping our residents and neighborhood organizations current and aware of the changes going on in their area. And last but not least, we appreciate all the work that everyone in the planning department has done to complete the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Chair Woods, Commissioners, friends. I just wanted to say that I appreciated your report. I had a few comments. One is regarding waivers, that you make the waiver requirements inclusive, so someone would have to meet all of them for a waiver. But with the 2-year requirement, I would recommend that you do 2 years or equity for people who've been impacted and excluded from the cannabis businesses. And I think Commissioner Gardner would probably have language for that. I would also recommend that for type 6, type 7, and cannabis grow facilities, no waivers be allowed. In terms of notification, I believe that there's one additional notification that wasn't in the proposed ordinance, and that would be a notification for the neighborhood organizations within a mile of any proposed business at the time an application is filed and also at the time that a hearing would be coming forward, so that there would be two different times that organization would be notified. In terms, although I know it's not your purview to look at the projects that are in the pipeline, I think this commission could recommend to the City Council that they not exempt properties that are in the pipeline, or recommend a 6-month moratorium. The concern that I have is that that there is a concentration of properties in the M1 zone and also in Demuth that would really impact those neighborhoods if all of the projects that are in the pipeline were approved. And none of the changes that you're making here would make any difference unless the City Council does not exempt those properties, those applications from the new process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Paul Henriksen, Palm Springs, also chair of the Upper West Side Neighborhood Organization. And as you've heard me speak before, our neighborhood was strongly impacted by grow facilities that already had mitigation plans and odor control plans. And we were at a desperate hour because we couldn't open our windows and doors. So it's really important that this is done right and that we move forward. Fortunately, the city did act when the neighborhood spoke up not just ours, but other neighborhoods as well. And we've had a significant improvement. But there still is one big gap, and that's with the technology that we have today. This is a rapidly evolving science with cannabis, and one part of that technology isn't keeping up with the rest, and that's the mitigation and monitoring. Fortunately, the city has invested in the nasal rangers, but there's still substantial weak links in that process and the technology that goes with that process. Because we continue, even in our neighborhood, to file complaints when we have issues, and because of shifting wind and so on and so forth and time delays, the staff does a really good job here at the city, trying its best to make sure that they monitor and are responsive to the community. But there's still these major gaps. So an important component is the technology, that when newer technology is available, that be required to be implemented as well. Because what we have now apparently is the best available, but it still is problematic and leaving us with some problem. Fortunately, not as bad as it used to be. The I-10 corridor, cannabis corridor, green zone, whatever you want to call it, that has strong support with the neighborhoods, very strong support. And even when there is newer technology with mitigation and the odor control, I think it's going to be a challenge to absolutely eliminate it completely. And if it's up in that zone, it's not going to impact the neighborhoods or general retail, and that's a big plus. And that allows us to contain a problem in an area where it's not going to impact the residents. And that's really important. And that's why so many people from 1PS are here and talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Robert Heinbaugh, and I'm a resident of the Upper West Side. Excuse me. I'm also Secretary of 1PS and a member of the Cannabis Work Group. Today, excuse me. Today I'm speaking to you as a private citizen. I want to express my appreciation to you for the efforts that you've put forward, and to the staff for the efforts they've put forward in bringing forth this ordinance. But my comments are going to be a little bit different from the ones that you've heard from everybody else. Following most meetings, there's always a few parking lot meetings that take place, as you're well aware. Last night was no exception. Several clusters of individuals gathered in their groups after the 1PS-sponsored candidate forum for District 1 at the James O. Jesse Unity Center in the north end of the city last night. Several individuals in my parking lot meeting began discussing whether or not to attend today's Planning Commission meeting. One person inhaled deeply, sighed with exasperation, and declared rather emphatically that no, I'm not going to be in attendance. That individual went on to explain that after so many months of expressing concerns, making suggestions, speaking before this commission and city council, they felt it was like kicking a dead horse to get up and start moving again. The exasperation and futility in the voice of that person is a sad commentary, even in spite of the progress that I see taking place. The simple fact that citizens, and this individual is not alone, are losing patience as well as hope simply because they feel that their voices are not being heard or don't make a difference does not reflect well on our democratic process. Outside of this building, it reads, "The people are the city." I hope we'll never lose sight of that moniker. The issues are not about tax revenues. The issues are not about cannabis. It is about all of us working together. We have to listen to the voices of the people who make up this city, the people who are this city, the people who will be this city the years and the decades who follow us. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? So in the interest of time, because we have to get through this and the agenda, I think I'll go starting with Commissioner Gardner to go around, and actually at this point it's about comments and providing any direction to staff when they come back at the next meeting.
One thing that I wanted to talk about with the green zone locations, this is the first time that we're seeing maps. I don't know if you can put it back on the screen or not. The one that's, yeah. So this M2 location, just beyond that is a mobile home park. So I just want to be really careful with what we're doing here because as we've talked about, we wouldn't be having any buffer distances or anything in that M2 industrial zone if we made a particular green zone. And basically, we would be pushing out the problem to other residents. So I just want to make sure that we're mindful of that. And if possible, maybe we can get some staff recommendations on distance requirements within that zone as well, because I think what happens when you have a green zone is there's going to be a lot more concentrated odor, and I don't know what that impact will be on that community. And just in general with the odor, I do think that we need to make sure that we're developing the right technology, of course. And so with these, I know there would be new buildings and all of that, but I just want to make sure that we're mindful that there is a community that's there. And there's actually quite a few people with children there. There's actually quite a lot of children in that mobile home park. So just to be mindful of that as we're moving forward. The other piece is that the social equity portion, I did make that comment at the last meeting that I thought that should be included with the waiver process. I think it just got left out, but it's in the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay. And if you have any specific language that you'd like us to look at, if you could just forward that to me, that would be great.
Perfect, I'll do that. What's the other thing? Oh, and I do want to hear more about the size of the grow facilities. Oh gosh, now I'm forgetting names. Stephen mentioned the size of his in comparison to the others, and I do think I'd like to get more information on that and exactly what that impact is, because I think that is a really big difference if you're talking about a 350 square foot space versus a 10,000 foot space for growing. You know, what is the impact? Are there technologies available that can really truly mitigate the odor in such a small space in comparison to a much larger space? In terms of the waivers, generally, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about the businesses being vacant. So when we say 3 years, I guess, is it 3 years vacant the entire time? And is there any movement on that? I'm not sure that I think we should have a list of requirements that says we have to meet all of these in order to provide a waiver. I think there should be a little bit more flexibility on that to allow these to be considerations to be made. And part of that is with the renting of spaces, because we want to be mindful of people not raising the rent, but certain spaces in town might be just really good to fill, and maybe that business would be useful there. The other thing is, one of the other public comments that was made mentioned the different types of businesses and requested that we look at lounges with dispensaries separately than just dispensaries. And I'm wondering if we want to think about whether or not there's a certain number, or if there's just different requirements made for lounges with dispensaries versus the dispensaries. Because as I mentioned the last time, I feel like people are going to want a place to go to use cannabis, and I don't think that there's really enough of that right now to cater to that community based on how many dispensaries we have or will possibly have.
Thank you. Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, again, I wasn't at the study session, so a lot of this is new to me, but hearing from the public about people that have spent money on city applications for projects, and after the application's been submitted, the rules have changed. I think we need to look at a minimum, refunding the application fees. I know, but are we allowed to make recommendations to council along those kind of lines?
We won't on that issue because it's not a zoning issue.
So it's just
Certainly
silent.
go and testify. Commissioner Donenfeld.
I'm very sorry, Mr. Hirschman. I didn't mean to, I sort of put the hammer down on you. I didn't mean to do that at all. I just want to make some comments to, I think one of the most important things we've done is mandating 6 and 7 type manufacturing and cultivation in the green zone. I think that's extremely important. I do like some of the suggestions that were made with respect to waivers. Ms. Wormick made a couple of very important recommendations, I think. I believe in waivers because I think the city council should certainly have discretion in extraordinary cases because they are the governing body of our city. But I think the waiver criteria should be relatively stringent. And by that I mean, I think the criteria should be cumulative and not separate and individual. And I think with respect to allowing an applicant with 2 years' experience in operating a license to come in, I think the equity position is also important because just operating a license doesn't give you the investment in being a good citizen that being an owner is. I think being an owner for this facility under the waiver would be very good. With respect to type 6 and 7, I think that there should be no waivers on 6 and 7 because once you allow, 6 and 7 is what we're all talking about basically and have continued to talk about. And once you open that up, then I think you're back to opening up Pandora's box, and I don't think that's a good idea. Again, it goes against my wanting to have waiver criteria for the city council, but I think bottom line is 6 and 7 have to be kept out of, as much as possible, out of and not affecting where people live and recreate. The notification, I'm a little concerned of notification. Certainly notification is important, but if we continue to expand the number of notifications and the geography of the notifications beyond what is normally found in our city code, you're putting a tremendous burden on the Planning Commission, and we continue to add burdens to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission adds no more staff. So I think we have to be careful in terms of wanting and having a proper notification, but not doing it so extensively geographically and numerically that we really make notification more important than regulating the substance of the cannabis industry. I do want to address the final comment from someone who I respect very much, who spoke at the very end, but I have to disagree with him. We all know people who complain and complain and complain that city government is not being responsible, is not moving enough, is not representing the people, and I know what our motto says in the front. But with respect to this issue, I think the city has, and I think we have taken this extremely seriously. I believe that that person who complained probably has never attended a city function or a city meeting when it comes to any of these issues. I think we take this very seriously. This is really a quality of life issue that is going to affect all of us going forward. And unless we get it right now, when it's sort of a blossoming industry, we're going to be caught being nothing but known as the place where cannabis is grown, cultivated, and distributed. And that's not the Palm Springs that any of us want, nor do I think your commissioners, your staff, or your city council want it to be that way. So we're all working really hard to make sense of this. We don't want to necessarily lose the industry altogether, but it's got to be balanced with proper appropriation for what it's like to live in Palm Springs.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Ritzie.
Someone raised the question about type 6, not wanting that to be lumped in with 7. What exactly, again, are odors produced in type 6 manufacturing?
Type 7 is extraction using volatile processes, and type 6 is non-volatile processes. Between the two, type 6 has less of an impact, less of the possibility for odors, as I understand it, than type 7. But based on your discussion at the last meeting, you wanted to keep both of those together in terms of how we regulated.
Okay, so it's not really clear how much more odor is produced in 7 versus 6.
I don't know that you could
Yeah, I don't know how you
quantify it that way.
either. I mean, my colleagues have raised the issues that I was thinking about, so I have really no other questions.
Thank you. For my comments, I agree with what staff is doing at this point. I think one thing that we're missing is that a lot of the businesses in the cannabis and what we heard from testimony are small businesses. And one small business will keep any other small business from opening, but if it was a large business, it could have the same impact. It's just something we haven't really thought about because it is a lot of small businesses. I agree with the distance. I agree with the notification. I agree absolutely with making sure that we use the latest and greatest technology, not just carbon-only filters. I like the idea of a waiver that includes the criteria, maybe with some social criteria as well. Maybe that's a shortening of the time that the building is vacant, as was suggested, or maybe it's something other than that, which Commissioner Gardner will forthcoming to it with us. So in the whole, I applaud staff and I applaud the public for participating in this. I also want to say, lastly, what I agree with, and I put out a challenge to the cannabis industry, is that we do architectural review. I think we don't want head shops. What we want is something that looks really good, mixes and blends in, both in our industrial zones as well as our commercial zones. So with that, I'll close. Commissioner Gardner. Yeah.
Just one thing about the review of the signs. So it says AAC and then it goes to City Council. That just seems like a lot to me. AAC seems like it should be enough. I'm not sure how City Council will feel about that, but when we're talking about streamlining and making things a little bit easier, especially since other businesses, don't have to go through that process, it seems like AAC can handle it. And then I have to make a comment regarding Commissioner Donenfeld's comments, because I do want to put out there that there have been communities that have been advocating for changes in the cannabis ordinance for a really long time, and it's finally something is happening now, but they've been doing this for almost 2 years, and so I think that there are legitimate reasons why they're frustrated, and it's not that they haven't been here, they have. It's just now a lot of you who are in this room are now kind of taking up the mantle and bringing it forward and giving them a little bit of a break.
Okay, except for some of the suggestions I've heard, I think staff has direction, and it seems like we're completely on track with maybe some minor modifications here and there. With that, I'll move on with the agenda. Was there any final comments that anyone wanted to say in the discussion part of it? All right,
Mr.
thank
Chair,
you.
just again for the members of the public, we will have a public hearing on this item on October the 10th. So the Planning Commission will make their final recommendations on October the 10th.
Again, I want to reiterate, thank you very much. Thank you for your detailed letters. Many of them came in. We really appreciate that. And it was really nice that those letters actually addressed the ordinance itself and what you liked or disliked about the ordinance. So I want to thank everyone for participating in that discussion. Okay, moving on with the agenda, we have Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. Any comments from the Planning Commission? Commissioner, Vice Chair Maruzzi.
Regarding TOVA, you wouldn't be happy if I didn't bring it up, and I always will bring it up. I submitted my comments to the city attorney, and I have since spoken with our attorney who's here, Mr. Priest, and he is going to forward that with probably a big gold star on it so that I can get a response to my very detailed points. The other thing is, regarding Bel Air Greens, I've been told that there's new activity. I was confused. Is there a general plan amendment that's recently been proposed? What's going on with Bel Air Greens?
Let's see, Mr. Newell is not here. They had originally submitted a general plan amendment back in July of 2018. We went to our environmental consultants to get proposals on the environmental review for that, and the applicant did not proceed forward with it. They have since submitted a new application. I haven't seen it yet, but keep in mind that the golf course conversion ordinance recently passed second reading at City Council on September the 18th. And so any modifications to the property would be subject to the new conversion ordinance.
So they submitted it with that knowledge, I would assume. One of the things, for tribal jurisdiction, this has always been a confusion for this property, right? There's a portion of it that is LLT and a portion of it that is not, right? Correct?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe it's all LLT.
It's all LLT?
Yeah.
Oh, entirely, okay. And again, that, according to our recently passed ordinance, if the LLTs don't agree with our conclusions or at the city council level, it can be appealed to them, is that correct?
It can be appealed to the tribal council, correct.
Okay, so that, this might be one of the first times it actually happens. Thank you.
Any more comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Donenfeld.
Quick question, what's happening on the rail project? I drive by it every day and I see no progress and maybe one or two workmen sometimes.
Yeah, they still have an active building permit, and apparently there are still workmen there on the site occasionally. I hope to learn more about that tonight at the State of the City address. I think the mayor and the city manager may have more information than we do at our level in terms of the progress on the project.
And you think they will talk about it
I
tonight?
believe it will be discussed, yes.
Well, we'll follow up on that. What about the Dream?
Dream? As you'll recall, they received approval for their amendment and an extension of time. They're in the process of doing their construction documents to modify the approved plans in conformance with their amendment. We expect that they would be able to pull building permits about February.
Oh. And wasn't there something they were going to come back to us on as far as that submittal?
I can't remember right off the top of my head. I believe there were a couple of things where they needed to tweak portions of the design.
Yeah.
So, Flynn, that would be the landscaping design for the northwest corner of Avenida Caballeros and Amado Road.
And also the entrance sequence.
Yes, and the entrance sequence also, along Calle Alvarado, I believe. Yeah.
And Amado. Okay.
My only comment is to my fellow commissioners. I want to thank you on the residential project we reviewed tonight for being so thorough and caring so much. I purposely made that motion to get it going and move it along, but I think what we came up with is an excellent outcome. So I just really wanted to say that to my fellow commissioners. Other than that, let's move on to the planning director's report.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of things. First, I'd like to turn the time over to Mr. Robertson. He would like to give you a little bit of an advance discussion of a project that's going to be coming up on your next agenda. It's a little bit unusual, so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, thank you, Director Flynn. Good afternoon, the Planning Commissioners. So earlier on, I placed a copy of an initial study on your dais. And although this item is not on the agenda today, however, like the director mentioned, we wanted to give you a heads up on this item that will be coming to you in the next meeting. And because of the complexity and the uniqueness of this project, we wanted to give you a heads up on it. So I will be urging you to please go over the initial study and the MND. If you have any questions prior to the meeting date, please forward those to me so that we can address them. And the reason for that is because of the technical nature of this project. It will be first of its kind in our city. It is an energy storage facility. Unlike what we've seen with WEX, the wind energy conversion system, this is a battery energy storage system, so it's slightly different than what you've seen in the past. And so that is the reason why I wanted to make a presentation of this to you prior to the meeting date. Essentially, what a battery energy storage system consists of is lithium-ion battery that creates energy that will be stored in those facilities, and then in turn, they will be transmitted to a local Southern California Edison line. So that's what it's all about. That's just the gist of it. This will be located in an appropriate zoning area at the south, along the south of Dinah Shore Drive, between Gene Autry and Crosley Road. It's a vacant property. I have an area photo of the location at the back of the memo that I gave you. So again, I just want to urge you all to go over these, the MND. And if you have any questions, please forward those to staff so that we can get you the appropriate responses on those. Thank you.
So you've recommended MND.
Yes, sir. So there's an MND, and that's the copy of.
Right, so that you've already gone through this, you've made your, given your conclusion, and that is it's an MND,
Correct.
as opposed to perhaps an environmental impact
ND.
report or other things. So one of the questions we could ask is, do we agree with whether or not there should be an MND?
Well, so far, from the initial study, staff is in agreement with our consultant that an MND will be sufficient, will be an environmental document that is sufficient to address our concerns.
Yeah, I understand how that works, but under CEQA, we could say we don't agree with you.
Yes, when we have the public hearing on this item, we can have that discussion at that time.
Good point.
The Planning Commission can review the environmental documentation, and ultimately you all would need to determine if you feel it's adequate or not. So yes, you do have that option.
Are we,
The entire submittal, there won't be any additional material on
Oh,
this?
there will be several other, there will be exhibits, there will be a more detailed staff report with all the findings.
will there be someone from Edison, perhaps an expert who can, if we have some technical questions, be here to answer them for us?
We'll look into that.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
Will the consultant
None
be
of
here
us are
so we, if we
engineers.
have questions about aspects of this? We
Yeah.
The
can,
CEQA consultant will be in attendance.
okay, and they know about battery factories, apparently. Okay.
Mr. Chair, one more item. The City Council considered the contract with the consultant that was selected to conduct our limited general plan update on September the 18th. What I would like to do, I'm going to pass out a copy of that staff report and then also the proposed schedule for the general plan update to you all, so you have an opportunity to look at that. And then on our next Planning Commission agenda, I'd like to discuss the schedule in a little bit more detail, so I'll actually do that as an agenda item. The Planning Commission is tasked as the body that is responsible for the adoption of the general plan and the implementation of the general plan. And so you all will be playing a key role in this update. One of the things I would like to do is I would also like to appoint a steering committee, a general plan steering committee. And we'll talk about that on the 10th in terms of how that committee should be made up. But just to give you kind of an idea of what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a steering committee that will be representative of the city. And by that, I mean having a representative from each of the city council districts serve on that committee. The steering committee would report to the Planning Commission and act under the direction of the Planning Commission. But again, I'll go into some of the specifics of that at our next meeting. And I'll pass this information out, but again, we're very excited to get started on this. As you may recall, this kind of generated out of the PDD subcommittee process that we had, which identified that a number of changes to our general plan were necessary. So again, we look forward to kicking off this project.
Glenn,
and
you may-
all will be very well involved in it.
If you're waiting for the steering committee to be approved from Planning Commission and representing the legislative districts, you may have to wait for a while because we likely could lose 2 more people. And then we've got an opening as it already exists. So City Council will have to be doing some major fill-in for us.
I don't know that we need to look to the City Council necessarily in terms of the appointments to the
But
steering
you mean it
committee.
doesn't have to be on the Planning Commission?
No.
Oh, I see what you
No.
mean. Oh,
In
and
fact,
would you prefer it not be?
Actually prefer it not to be.
One point I just wanted to make, I was in attendance for that council meeting, and there were some comments from, I think, some of the council members about wanting to enhance the part of this agreement about recommendations for zoning. Because part of it, they're allowed to give us their thoughts on how the zoning code should change to implement the changes to the, so
Correct.
is that going to be somewhat enhanced based on the comments from the council?
At this point, no. What we will look to is probably during the next budget cycle, we will identify that as a project for funding, is to actually do the update to our zoning ordinance based on the changes that come through the update to the general plan.
When will the housing element be addressed?
The housing element is going to be addressed later on in the process. It's part of the regional housing needs assessment process that SCAG, or the Southern California Association of Governments, is going through right now. So it won't be until October of 2020 that we will begin that process.
Wow. So all the discussion the council has regarding affordable housing and all that will be without any changes in the general plan?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We're going to tie this into the entire process. We'll get started on it now, but we'll go through, once we have the RENA numbers in October of 2020, that's when we'll really get serious about it.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, Mr. Chair, that ends my presentation to you.
Great. And you know something? We have 5 minutes before the lights go out. Don't need to use it. But I'd like to call for an adjournment. All those in favor? Okay, motion adjourned. Thank you.